Welcome everybody to the regular meeting of the Board of Directors of Vallecitos Water District on Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021 at 5 p.m. I'm going to read a quick notice to the public. And Glenn, can you put that up on the screen too? So if anybody wants to read along, they certainly can.
Can you see it?
Thank you. Okay. Due to the evolving situation with COVID-19 novel coronavirus, so long as state or local public officials have imposed or recommended social distancing measures, Vallecitos Water District will hold future meetings via teleconferencing and allow members of the public to observe and address the meeting telephonically or otherwise electronically. During this period of time, Vallecitos Water District will not be making any physical location available for members of the public to observe the meeting and offer public comment. The public is encouraged to watch and participate in the meeting from the safety of their homes. The meeting can be viewed on the agenda page located on the main page of the district's website. Public comments and questions can be submitted to the following email address: publiccomment@vwd.org. All written comments that are received at least 90 minutes before the meeting will be provided to the board, and a record of the receipt of the comment will be noted during the meeting. Members of the public viewing the meeting via Zoom video conferencing platform can express their desire to provide input at the appropriate time by utilizing the raise hand function. And additional instructions for online participation will be posted on the district's website at www.vwd.org/meetings. Okay, we'll go ahead and call us to order, and I'll do a roll call. Director Hernandez.
Here.
Director Pinnock.
Here.
Director Ellithorpe.
Here.
Director Boyd Hodgson.
Present.
And I'm here as well. And Director Hernandez, would you be so kind to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Thank you very much, President Sinella. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Director Hernandez. That's something we probably want to talk about, and I'm all in favor of doing it, but we got to find a better way of doing it. I don't know what that looks like, but maybe we put up the American flag like I've seen at some of the other agencies that we participate with. But thank you for leading us in our Pledge of Allegiance tonight, Director Hernandez.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I will entertain a motion to adopt tonight's agenda, please.
Hernandez, move to approve.
Okay, is there a second?
Second, Pinnock.
Okay, we have a motion to approve tonight's agenda by Director Hernandez and a second by Director Pinnock. I'll do a roll call vote. Director Ellithorpe.
Yes.
Director Boyd Hodgson.
Yes.
Director Hernandez.
Yes.
Director Pinnock.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so the motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving right along. I understand that we have some public comment tonight, Glenn.
We do. We have three public comments that came in. One is a general public comment and two are related item 2.2. So if it pleases the board, I'll read the one general public comment that we received.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this
And
is from
Glenn, are they here tonight, or did they just submit it?
I believe they're, well, for the general public comment, I did not see the sender in attendance today.
Okay.
They did not.
If they were here, I would have read the persons wishing to address the matter, and that we wouldn't be engaging back and forth. But since they're not here, just go ahead and read, please.
Yeah, and I will say that the person did not specifically ask that it be read into the public record, but they did submit it to the public comment email address that we include in the meeting notice. So I feel it's appropriate to read it in. So with that, I'll read it. So it's from Myrna Breslin, and here's what Myrna wrote. We have Vallecitos and live in the SEMA area and billed monthly. Only two of us, and our lowest bill was $147. Must have rained a lot that month because our average is $257. and in summer can get in the mid $450 range. We do not have a pool or spa, but we do have a half acre, mainly low maintenance plants and some lawn. In summer, we water 3 times a week for 5 to 8 minutes. We are very conservative. Our water bills have more than doubled in the past 10 years, and especially in the last 5 years. I have a friend in Vista with twice as much land and is billed every other month, and her bill is still half of what ours is every month. We are seniors on a limited income, and it is getting to where our utility costs will soon price us out of our home. And that's the end of the email. And I will add that staff is in the process of reaching out to Ms. Breslin to try to identify what the issue is with the high water consumption and water bill.
I appreciate that. And, you know, when you sent that correspondence to us and I read it, you know, it's natural to kind of compare what she was describing, her situation, with what I know best is my situation. And it does seem like there might be maybe an issue or something, because my lot is significantly smaller and pretty typical 2,500 square foot home, and no pool either. But and I water almost every day when it's not raining, and my water, the water portion of my bill probably is under $100 usually. And if you add both the water and the sewer, it's usually around, you know, 115, 120. So I know everybody's situation is a little bit unique, and properties are a little bit different, number of people who live in the home, etc. But that just it sounds really high to me. So it's definitely worth looking into.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar, and all matters listed under the consent calendar will be voted upon by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a board member or a member of the public requests that a particular item or items be removed from the consent calendar, in which case it'll be considered separately under action items. Is there a motion to approve tonight's consent calendar, please?
Move to approve.
Okay, thank you. There's a motion to approve the consent calendar. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Director Elithar.
Okay, thank you, Director Althorpe. We have a motion and a second to approve tonight's consent calendar.
Yeah, President Snell,
Yes.
I had one minor correction to the
Okay.
minutes of one of the meetings under 1.1, under closed session board meeting for February 24th, 2021. And I think it's shown on page 14 of the package. It says coming out of closed session that you, President Snell, adjourned the meeting, and you in fact had left the meeting before that. So we need to correct that.
Yep, that is correct. You got that, Glenn or Diane?
I do. I have it.
Okay, great. Good catch there, Director Althorpe.
I just
Okay,
wanted to prove that I actually read the board package.
That was well, and you led a portion of a meeting recently too, which is important too. So, okay, so we have a motion and a second. We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Director Althorpe.
Yes.
Director Boyd Hodgson.
Yes.
Director Pinnock.
Yes. Director
Hernandez.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move right along into action items, and we'll go to 2.1, award of construction contract for the Meadowlark reclamation facility.
Yeah,
is that Glenn or is that going to be James?
Actually, it's going to be Ed Pedrazzi, your operations manager, but just a real brief introduction. This is a project that will be taking place at Meadowlark, not just to increase or improve the efficiency of the lighting, but to actually address some safety concerns as well. And it was addressed in the previous report that the district had authorized about energy efficiency and conservation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed, and he can present the details.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, General Manager Prohm, for stealing some of my thunder. President Snell and members of the board. This project description begins on page 17 of your board packet, and I'll try to keep this brief because I know we have another action item on here that you're eager to hear from Wes and not from me, so I'm happy for that. This project's going to replace 79 existing lights or retrofit them with LED, and we're also installing 17 new ones for areas that we determined needed greater safety and security. There's 10 poles that are going to be involved, light poles. 8 are replacements, 2 are brand new. General Manager Pruitt mentioned that this was part of a district-wide energy audit, so we will be saving some electricity, some power, but overall this is about safety and security at the plant, and also about being good neighbors at the plant. The lights that are outside right now are on all night long. They're there for security and for safety. And the new ones, being LED, they're going to be able to dim down to 50% illumination at night unless motion is detected. So we haven't had any complaints about light pollution from the plant, but this will actually make us just better neighbors. Because as many of you know, the plant does not have anybody there at night unless there's an emergency or an alarm goes off. So it'll be nice for our neighbors as well. District staff sent out bids to 3 of our local electrical contractors. 2 replied, Southern Contracting Company and Baker Electric. Baker was the lowest and most responsive bidder at $172,609.85. The project was included in the 2021 capital budget, and the amount was for $150,000 in the budget. And obviously you see that we're going to be over budget. We have a budget shortfall of $28,297.85. Reason for that is a little bit of addition to the scope after the budget was put together. We did find some of those additional areas that we needed to improve our lighting. Some of it is also due to the increase in construction costs. You would think things would go down with COVID-19, but actually they've gone up considerably in this last year. So some of our budgets where we were doing the budget work over a year ago, now that we're going out to bid, we're finding that things have increased quite a bit. So in summary, recommendation for this project, we're asking the board to increase the project budget by $28,297.85, and then authorize the general manager to execute a construction contract with Baker Electric Incorporated in the amount of $172,609.85, subject to provisions of the contract. And I'd be happy to answer any questions on it.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Do any of my colleagues have any questions at this time? Or is there a motion? I see a hand. Director Boyd Hudson.
Just a couple of questions. So, you know, I noticed on the diagram that you provided us that it looks like there's at least one light that is solar, but I couldn't tell if the other lights were going to be solar as well. And I'm wondering, did you consider solar power? And if you did, why not use that? And if it's just not feasible, I'd like to know that as well.
Solar power was looked at. We would probably, in order to power all of the lights, we would need panels more than we have space to put them. You may be aware of 2 of our solar projects right now, the one at our Twin Oaks Reservoir facility, where we're covering about 5 acres with solar panels, and then also our lift station number 1 on San Marcos Boulevard, we're using some of our property to put more solar panels. A lot of the energy that's being used at Metal Arc Reclamation Facility will be offset by that solar project, or at least reduce cost. The reason the one light at the gate, on the back gate, was solar, it was to save money where we would have to trench and run power over to it. But the LED lights will save us quite a bit as far as power for the lights. Unfortunately, Metal Arc plant's our largest consumer of electricity, so it's a real drop in the bucket, but we're doing everything we can to save money.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Or is there a motion?
Move to approve. Hernandez.
Okay, thank you, Director Hernandez. Is there a second?
Second, Pinnick.
Okay. We have a motion to approve item 2.1 as it was presented by staff, by Director Hernandez, and a second by Director Pinnick. Before we take a vote, is there any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Director Pinnick.
Yes.
Director Boyd Hodgson.
Yes.
Director Elithar.
Yes.
Director Hernandez.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item 2.2, capital facilities expansion fund presentation. And Do
Yeah,
you want to,
so-
do you want to introduce it, Glenn, or do you want to go straight to Wes?
No, I'll introduce it. I'm just trying to get my controls here. Having a little problem. Yeah, so at the board's meeting on February 17th of 2021, there was a public comment that was raising issues about the capacity fund, capital facilities fund. And the board had a limited discussion, but they ultimately directed staff to place an item on the next agenda to allow the board to have a deeper discussion about the capacity fund. And that's why we're here tonight. So you're going to hear a presentation from Wes Owen to kind of give a broad overview of the capacity fund, what it is, where the money comes from, what the board's done in recent years and recent times to address the shortfall in that fund. And then the board can have a long, lengthy discussion and give whatever direction to staff that they want. And we do have, as I mentioned before, we do have two public comments that were submitted by the 3:30 deadline, and there's some other speakers that may or may not wish to speak on the item. But at this moment, I'd like to just turn it over to Wes and he can make the presentation.
Good evening, President Snell, members of the board. Tonight I get to present on the Capital Expansion or Capacity Fund. And this presentation is in response to, as General Manager Pruitt mentioned, some questions we received both from the board and from the public. So I'll start off by kind of recapping the funds, and this is usually Glenn's favorite part. So I don't know if he wants to go through the quadrants, and then I'll take over after if he wants me to do it. I'll leave that up to him.
Yeah, I'll tackle the first part, Wes, and then I'll leave the hard part for you. Yeah, so this is I believe the board may have seen this before. It's just a simple schematic to try to break down what could be a complex municipal financing. So we broke it into 4 quadrants, and as you can see, whenever we track funds, we break them down into whether they're either water or wastewater. So you're either on the left or the right side of this bar, that middle bar, and they're either for capacity, which is adding new infrastructure and capacity for future development, or their replacement. So they're below the line. So all the funds that we talk about are tracked in one of those 4 quadrants. Just to make sure that the money, we know when money comes in, where to place it, when money gets spent, we know where to take it from. So just as a kind of a mental abstract, this is, try to remember this exhibit as we go through the discussion. And if you have specific questions, we may ask for clarity on whether you're talking about water or wastewater or capacity or replacement funds. And that's why we may ask the question, just to know which quadrant we're talking about. So Wes, are there any more highlights on this one? Oh, yeah, so let's talk about capital facility fees a little bit. Excuse me. And basically what they are is they're fees that are paid by developers to cover the costs of facilities needed to support their development as it moves forward. And it's common for those costs to be incurred by an agency such as Vallecitos well in advance of when we collect the fees from the developer. So, for example, we may have to build a water tank well in advance of the developments that'll be served. So the costs of that construction of that water tank may be years or even decades before some of the development. So it's not uncommon that there may be some kind of a shortfall in the fund. And there's different ways to fill in that shortfall. It could be a deficit, and you'll hear the word deficit and shortfall later, or it could be an agency issuing debt. I wouldn't say they're interchangeable, but they're very similar. So the fees that we charge, they're based on a lot of things, and we don't just arbitrarily make up the numbers. We look at population growth, we look at facility master plans, what needs to be built, and we run through it's called a capacity fee model. We put something together to develop what the fee that we're going to charge developers is. And this is just a simple way to show it. So the capacity fee is the total costs of all this future capacity divided by the amount of growth. And Wes, if you can click it one more time. So a more expanded way to show that is it's the total costs are the debt, the revenue shortfall, and all future projects. These are the numerator of this calculation is all the costs. Now, some of those are future costs, like future projects, and some of them are past costs, like we may have outstanding debt. So we're trying to recapture all those costs for the facilities that need to be constructed. And the denominator is simply the number of equivalent dwelling units. So for example, a single family residence is considered one equivalent dwelling unit. An apartment is less than a dwelling unit, and you can get big commercial developments that are in the multiples of EDUs. But so basically we're looking at what costs do we need to recapture and how many equivalent dwelling units are we spreading those costs over? And that's a high level explanation of how we calculate the capacity fee. And I think that's the last slide on this, Wes, if you can click one more time. And I think we'll transition. So that's just a simple overview. There's probably not many questions here, but if there are, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, Wes is going to get into a more detailed discussion of how we track these things, where the money comes from, and we'll be showing you a lot of numbers and some charts. So I'm sure it'll raise a lot of questions, and then we'll be going to the public to find out what questions they may have. So President Sinella, if there's no questions at this point,
I do see, I see one hand up and I have a question as well, but I'll go ahead and call on Director Boyd Hodgson.
So just one of those bullets that that you mentioned about it being, common to have, the cost to be incurred well in advance of the fee collection. I think it's important to note that, yes, for projects that are going to be used for many generations, for example, yes, those have to be built, and they're not built necessarily for just one high rise that's going to be constructed. But there are also, immediate costs like connector fees that I know that we're going to talk about. So I think it's really important to differentiate those costs. Those are not equivalent, and they shouldn't be, they're not, those costs aren't borne by the same populations of people. So I want to add that, because I think it's important to note that there are a couple of different costs that we're talking about.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I would clarify that if there are facilities that needed to be built that are specific to a development, then we require that development build those facilities in conjunction with their project, and they pick up 100% of those costs. What we're mostly talking about here is those backbone infrastructure that service multiple developments. And it wouldn't be fair to make the construction of a 7 million gallon tank the responsibility of a small 100-unit subdivision. So we're really talking about those bigger facilities that provide benefits to multiple developments, not something that's specific to a development. So that's a general statement. There may be some exceptions, but in general, that's a true statement.
Yeah, just to further expand on that, because when I first joined the board in 2014, we of course were talking about capital facility fees back then, and the way I believe it was Ed and the general manager and the assistant general manager back then explained it is that, when they're developing or building this backbone infrastructure, they don't build, like, let's just say a pipe for example, they don't build a pipe that's just sized for whatever the immediate need is. They build the pipe for what we're going to need 25, 30, 40, 50 years from now. That way they don't have to keep upsizing the pipe as they go along. And so the way I was able to kind of picture it in my head to kind of dumb it down a little bit was that basically the district will go ahead and build that pipe for the 50-year future. And then every development that comes in after that, they have to kind of buy into the system and buy into the club, if you will. And they have to pay their fees to get access to the infrastructure that the district and our customers have already paid in order to be able to continue to serve everybody for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And so is that still correct? Because when I was trying to rationalize this in my head 5 years ago, I was, a brand new board member, and I'm still today trying to figure things out as we go, but especially back then, I certainly was.
Yeah, that's still correct. Whether it's a facility that was already built in the past or a facility that needs to be built in the future, the same kind of model applies. We're going to look at all the costs of that. And if it provides general benefit to all future development, then that development is going to pay their share of those costs.
Great. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, Wes, it's back to you.
Okay, time to have some fun. Okay, so now We'll go into the next part of the capacity fund presentation, and the agenda for tonight, as I mentioned, is to hopefully address some questions we've had from both the board and the public. So we'll go through this, and the first thing I want to do is I want to sort of list the board questions or the director questions, and hopefully we can address each one of those during this presentation. The next thing we'll do is we'll just recap on the district reserves, how they're set up. And then we'll talk about the capacity fund and the background, and we'll give actually some hopefully simplified scenarios to help people understand how the cap fee model works and how it flows. Then we'll talk about the historical capacity reserve balances, help us understand how we got where we are. Next, we'll talk about the projected capacity reserve balances, and that's going to be still the projected balances per the approved fiscal year 2021 budget. Then we'll talk about some of the project funding, which were related to questions of how we pay for capacity projects. We'll talk about our capacity shortfall action plan. We've talked about it before, but we're going to add one bullet point to it tonight for excitement. And then we'll talk about the conclusion. So let's get started. The director questions. The first one, and these aren't necessarily in the order that they were received. I kind of put them in order that would hopefully flow through the presentation. So if they're out of order, and I apologize if they were meant to be in a different order, but the first question I have is, if we collected capacity fees or some portion of capacity fees at inception, how would that impact the capacity deficit? So rather than talk about them right now, I'm going to get to them in the presentation, but I'm going to just go through them one at a time. The second question is, why do we have a deficit in the sewer fund? Third question, what is the timeline for overcoming this deficit, and what progress can we make in the next 2 years? Then, if we actually have money in the bank that is not reflective of a negative balance in the fund, how much is there? If it's not enough to cover our planned projects, how do we pay for them? And finally, what do you mean by paper loan? Who is the borrower, who is the lender, and what are the terms? So we'll go through these questions, but that's the list to begin with. So here we go. First, I want to talk about, as I mentioned, the district reserves. The district has, as you know, two types of reserves. These reserves are established for internal reporting purposes. They're not officially, they're in the budget as part of our 5-year plan, but they're not officially audited or published anywhere that's required. We are required to bring the board to report, but for the most part, it's an internal reporting or accounting structure. And don't fall asleep because I said accounting. I know not a lot of people here like to hear about accounting. But the reserves are established, and the replacement reserve is the first one. That's established based on the reserve policy. We've gone over what that entails multiple times. And the replacement, and the other fund is the capacity fund, the capacity reserve. And that's basically established based on California Government Code Section 66013, also referred to as the Mitigation Fee Act. That requires us to report it separately and never commingle the funds. And that's why we have our internal reporting that has the funds separate. So the replacement reserve, going through it quickly, is the beginning balance plus the operating revenues or revenues from ratepayers, less operating expenses, less the cost of replacing existing infrastructure, and that gives you your ending balance. So that's the only fund that's affected by ratepayers. Then you have the capacity fund. You got the beginning balance plus the capacity fees. Those are fees from developers for growth, less the growth projects, less the debt service to fund those growth projects, and that gives you your ending balance. So that's how the two funds function. You can see that, again, I can't stress enough, ratepayers only pay for replacement reserves they're not affected by capacity. So today we're going to be focusing on capacity. So just the capacity fund. We won't be mentioning operations or ratepayer money unless, well, shouldn't be mentioning it at all, except to say that it's not included. So moving on, the capacity reserves, what are they made up of, and how do we set the fees? Well, they're funded by developers for growth, and the rates are established by a cap fee study, which the district recently completed July 9th, 2019. It was approved on August 7th, 2019. And this cap fee study was actually prepared by Atkins and Keys Group, LLC, our consultants. And it was based on our water sewer master plan, which was recently approved in May of 2019. The cap fee study resulted in a rate increase of approximately 17.9%, which was effective January 2nd, 2020. So about a year ago, we raised rates by almost 18%.
Raised rates on who?
And when I say rates, I mean rates for capacity fees. So the capacity fee rates went up. This has
Capacity
nothing.
fees that developers pay.
Correct.
Yeah, we raised the fee, not customer rates.
Okay.
So yeah, and if I do that, thank you, Director Snell. If I do that again, like in this presentation, I'm only referring to the fees collected from developers for capacity fees. I won't be referring to ratepayer rates except to say that they're excluded.
Okay, thank you.
And not only were they increased by 17.9% in January 2nd, 2020, those rates are also increased annually through a construction inflation index. Over the last 5 years, it's been approximately 2.5% or so. And that's done every January 1st of every calendar year. So I want to go through a simplified capacity model scenario here to help understand first how it's supposed to flow, and then what can happen when the assumptions don't work out the way you plan, because it's like anything else with the budget, or when you're creating a model, you plan, you have certain assumptions. So let's take a look at one scenario in particular, or at least to start with. So in this scenario, we're planning to construct an $8 million facility to expand our system. In order to do that, since there are only two types of proceeds or revenue for the capacity fund, we need to issue debt for $8 million to construct that or build that project. So that takes about 6 months, right? So we need to start 6 months in advance, start planning for the issuance of the debt. And in this scenario, we're assuming that we can get it at 4.5% for 20 years. The debt service payments on that on an annual basis are going to be $610,000. And finally, we have to assume that this project will serve 894 EDUs, which will be sold over 20 years, so about 47 EDUs per year. The rate comes out to be $12,986 per EDU, and the amount collected per year on the 47 EDUs will be $610,000. So now let's look at it just from a flow standpoint or sequence standpoint. So first you issue the $8 million in debt. Then you have to build the project, so you have to construct it. So you have $8 million in construction costs. Then your debt service payments come due in the first year. So you have to pay $0.6 million or $610,000 in debt service costs. But you're hoping to collect the 47 EDUs per year or $0.6 million for cap fee revenue. So how does that work from a cash flow basis? Well, you have plus $8 million when you actually have the debt proceeds, but you're going to spend it on the construction costs. So then you're down to $0. Next, you have to spend $0.6 million on your debt service costs, and now you're negative $0.6 million. And finally, you collect cap fees, and you're back to zero in the fund. So this is a perfect world, ideal scenario for the cap fee model. This is how it's set up, and it's intended to be a zero-sum game. Growth pays for growth.
Why would you put the cap fee at the end, though? Why wouldn't you?
So that's a good question. And actually, we have it in the director questions as what would happen if we collected at inception versus occupancy. And I'll be answering that directly after this scenario, if that's okay.
Okay.
So next, let's talk about a modified scenario. Same scenario, but in this scenario, the actual project costs are $13 million. So you started 6 months in advance. It was based on what you had in your budget. So this is well before the project is constructed, but you get into the project and it ends up costing $13 million instead of $8 million. Well, you still issued $8 million of debt because you were into your plan. You didn't know what it was going to cost. But then you had $13 million in construction costs. And you still have the $0.6 million in debt service costs that you have to pay. And you're still hoping to collect the $0.6 million in cap fee revenue if you get the 47 EDUs that year. So from a cash flow perspective, you got $8 million in debt proceeds, but you had to spend $5 million on project costs. Once you started, you couldn't stop. You only got $8 million. You got to build the project. Now you're $5 million in the hole. So you got to spend $0.6 million on the debt service costs. Now you're $5.6 million in the hole. And then you collect the $0.6 million in cap fee revenues. You're lucky enough to actually get that. So you're at negative $5 million in this scenario. So that's one way things can go wrong if you don't meet your assumptions, if a project just costs more, and we've seen this happen on multiple occasions where the project costs more than you planned. So next, we're going to go through another, there are several factors here. We could talk about the interest rate being different, and I spelled years with two E's. I meant to fix that, but I guess it's kind of funny. So you could, the interest rate could be different. You could not get the loan term you want. There could be several other factors that could go wrong in the scenario. But the second one I want to look at is, what if you only collected 23 EDUs in the first year, right? So you expected to collect 47, which would have been 610,000, but now you're going to collect, you only sold 23. Development slowed, you only got 23 EDUs. So what do? You get $300,000. So from a flow standpoint, $8 million in debt, you spend $8 million on the construction costs. So then you have to pay your debt service of 0.6 million, but you only collect 0.3 million in cap fee revenue. So cash flow, you got plus 8 million, you're down to zero when you spend the 8 million. You have to spend another 0.6, you collect 0.3, and now you're at negative $0.3 million. So both these scenarios show you how, even in the close to perfect world, you can end up with a shortfall or deficit in your capacity fund. So those are the two scenarios. Next thing I'll talk about is collecting the
Wes,
Yes,
we have a question.
Wes?
We have a question by Director Hernandez.
So if we don't borrow the 8 million and we borrow it from ourselves, we would get the 6.6 million to us. Wouldn't that be correct?
So we'd still have to pay the interest expense to the replacement reserve.
Okay.
But it would be significantly less than $0.6 million, yes.
All right. Thank you.
So if there are no other questions here, I'll move on to the capacity fee collection.
Quick question. Where are the cap fee revenues coming from?
Cap fee revenues come from developers based on the cap fee. So when a developer starts a development, it may be, say in this example, it's 23 EDUs for that development. He finishes it. Once he comes up and tells us, I want to turn on the water at occupancy, he or she, whoever the developer is, pays the 23 units times the 12,096 before we actually provide that service to them.
And you've been saying if we're lucky enough to get that, has that been historically, has that been difficult to get?
There are several factors that come into the cap fee model that make it, difficult to predict. First of all, you have to go historically, you have to predict what's going to happen in the future. No one could have predicted COVID, the recession that happened in 2009. Not only that, but we have strict regulations on things that we have to follow, such as SANDAG, the land use plan. So they say it's going to be this many EDUs to build out. So you have to look at that, and that has to be incorporated in your cap fee model, or you can be sued. And it's hard to defend if you don't have a basis for the EDUs that you've established in the cap fee model.
Gotcha.
Clarification, Wes?
Yes.
Every developer that comes in with a project, let's say he's going to build a project and it requires 10 EDUs. He has to pay those 10 EDUs. He said, well, I can't afford 10, I'll only pay you 8. He has to pay 10 if he's going to build 10.
Yep.
Very
Absolutely.
good.
Yes. So when I say slow down in development, so we might project that we're going to collect 300 EDUs this year. And then we have, based on our build out, schedule, and then we may only have 1 or 2 developments that year, and it may come in at 100 EDUs. Now, based on our model, though, we're hoping those EDUs still come in because it's still within our service area and our build out plan, right? So the 200 EDUs that were not collected that year, we're hoping we'll recoup the next year or the year after. Overall, the EDUs could still be there, but if they slow down, you end up in a shortfall situation.
So a construction delay is the only reason why we would not collect the number of EDUs than we originally thought, because as Director Hernandez said, if a developer comes in and says, I'm going to build something and I need 10 EDUs, we then collect 10 EDUs. So it's a timing issue.
Yes.
That's the thing? Okay.
Yes.
Hey, Wes, but is it also possible that so any of the infrastructure that's directly related to the development, let's say there's on the books, there's a 500 home development. Any of the infrastructure that is directly related to that that'll be built by the developer. So let's say they had plans in their forecast to build a 500 home community. But then as they went through the process, the city council voted to only allow them to build 380 homes. Well, they can change their plans for their immediate infrastructure that they need to support it to build that 380. However, that backbone that we're planning for was based off the 500, and we've already started building for the 500, and we're not going to now get 120 units worth of capacity fees because they didn't build 500 units. They only got approved to build 380, but we built infrastructure based off of the forecast and the plan that we were given by Sandag and others. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they didn't get approved for what Sandag said that they could get approved for. Is that true?
That's true, and that's one of so the two major downfalls, or the two major difficulties in the cap fee model, are one, that you'll set the cap fee too low as a result of something like that. Another thing you can do in the cap fee model is if you don't have your time horizon correct, right? So I know that in the previous cap fee model that was done in 2012, the horizon was something like 60 years for certain projects, right? So we said that the Twin Oaks Reservoir might be over 60 years. So the denominator, the EDUs, was very high, which results in your cap fee being too low. So it's the same thing happened there, where if we had made the horizon shorter, like in the current cap fee model, it's 20 years. So we shortened it to 20 years, which was the minimum we were allowed to shorten it to, based on advice from legal counsel and our consultants, in order to narrow the EDUs and increase the capacity fees. So yes, that's one of the major problems. The other one is if you underestimate the cost of the projects, right? So if you say the projects are going to cost too little, or I think it's the other way around, you overestimate the cost of the project. So if you say they're going to cost more, you're going to set the EDU. Did I say that right? I think I'm a little confused there. Basically, if you don't estimate the cost of the projects correctly, like in this example, if you said it was going to cost $8 million, it cost you $14 million or $13 million, then you've underset your cap fees because you based it on $8 million in debt. So I got it right there. So you're underestimating the cost of the projects. So you issued $8 million in debt. You're only putting $8 million in debt in your cap fee model. So the cap fee that pays for the debt that's set based on that amount of debt is too low, right? You've only set an amount to collect to pay for $8 million in debt, but you spent $13 million on the project.
I think Mike Arthur is going to try to clean that up for you, Wes.
I can use all the help I can get right there.
I just have one bit of clarification. So that is absolutely true what Wes is saying, but let's be reminded that the next time we do a cap fee study, all that stuff is incorporated. So that money is not gone. So if, for your example, Director Sinella, if we were short 120 EDUs, eventually 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, when we do the new cap fee study, all that stuff is reincorporated, and we have a new numerator, new denominator, and we do that as often as we need.
And that's why it's important that we revisit the cap fee model on a regular basis. And we'll talk about that as part of our action plan towards the end of the presentation. But I think it's going to be important that we're proactive in addressing and actively addressing the shortfall and looking at the cap fee model.
And what is our EDU right now? And is it different? Are there two? Is there one for water and one for sewer? What is our?
Yeah, Mike, do you have that number off the top of your head, or I can pull up the cap fee model?
Yeah, for Sandag numbers, we use Sandag in the models, and I think it's 840 EDUs for water and 800 for sewer, or it could be reversed. It's something close to that. I could pick up the model and look it up as you go on.
So I'm looking at the example here. I thought that we learned in a meeting past it was 7,000 something.
That's over like a 10-year horizon. So it's not 7,000 in 1 year. We used, I think, 8,400 over a 10-year period for water and 8,000 over a 10-year period for sewer. And I'll double check those numbers.
So it's a 10-year period. Is that the number that has been increased by 17.9%?
No, the fee that was calculated was what was increased by a composite 17.9%. The water was increased a certain percent and the wastewater was increased a certain percent. But for a customer that pays both in a composite fashion, their fees went up by 17.9%. It wasn't the number of dwelling units. It wasn't the project costs. It was the end result. The cap fee calculation was increased by 17.9% from what it was before the fee study.
Okay, so what is the cap fee then? What are we?
So the previous cap fee before January was 17,719. The approved cap fee, I believe, was, or was 20,882 per EDU. So the increase there is 17.9%.
That's both water and sewer.
Correct.
Can you separate those out?
Yep.
Water
I-
and sewer?
I have that, Wes, if you want. me
Oh,
to
go
take
ahead,
that.
Mike.
So for water, before the January 2nd, 2020 increase, the water fee was $7,756 per EDU. And that one only went up 1.8% to $7,896. That's water. The sewer cap fee prior to January 2nd, 2020 was $9,963. With the cap fee model adjustment, it went up to $12,986. So that one went up 30.3%. And as Wes mentioned, if you combine the two, it's the total of the 17.9% increase.
Thank you, Mike. I'm always happy to share. Sharing is caring, right? Okay, so if there are no other questions on this, we can move on to the collection of the cap fees. As you noted, in these scenarios, the capacity fee was collected at the end of each one. And that's because the district has a policy that we collect the capacity fees on occupancy. So what if we collected capacity fees or some portion of capacity fees at inception, how would that impact the capacity deficit? So in order to do this, I'm going to create another scenario for capacity fee timing. So let's say we have a project, it's a 2-year project with completion in January of the 3rd year. So in this case, the way we're currently set up, we collect the cap fees when they come in on January of year 3. So to go through this, I have some certain assumptions I've set up. And for this, I'm saying we're going to collect 100 sewer EDUs, and the rate's going to be, well, before I do that, let me do my terminology. Mike likes it when I do this, so we don't just refer to stuff. So I've got ENR and I've got IRR here. So ENR is the construction inflation index that we use. That's what's used to inflate the price every year or raise the capacity fee on an annual basis based on this inflation index. And the term IRR is the internal rate of return. That can be either our return on investments, or we could use our weighted average cost of capital for this. For the purposes of this example, this scenario, I'm going to make those two equal because typically the difference isn't, it's not very large. ENR over the last 5 years, as I mentioned, is like 2.5%. Our rate of return, if you were to look at it over the last 5 years, is probably 1.7 to 1.8%. So it's probably a little bit lower, but for this scenario, I'm going to make them equal for simplicity. So if we look at the capacity fund here, we can see that the beginning balance is our current shortfall or deficit of $15.1 million. Now, if we were to collect at inception, we would collect at a rate of $9,720 per EDU for 100 EDUs. So that would be $972,000. Now, if we have that money in order to compare it to at completion, we're saying we have that money for 2 years, correct? So we've got $972,000 we put in the bank, and we earn interest for 2 years. So our interest earnings is 2.5% compounded for 2 years, which would be $49,207. So your ending balance is actually a resulting decrease in the shortfall. So the shortfall goes down by that revenue you've earned to $14,084,000. So now let's look at if we were to collect it at completion. So if we were to collect it at completion, January 1st, year 3, that the rate would have been ENR'd up. So increased 2 years in a row by 2.5%, assuming all is the same for 2 years. So it would have gone from $9,720 to $9,996. When they came in to pay, we would charge them $10,212 in January of that year. So they would pay $10,212 times 100 EDUs, or $1,021,000. The difference between the two fund balances at the end, or the revenue collected, is 0. So that's the purpose of the inflation index, the ENR, is to really make that equivalent, right? So if you collect at the beginning, you collect at the end, it doesn't make a significant difference unless there was a huge variance between what you could earn as your rate of return and the ENR.
Yeah, and I would add that the developer has the option to pay early. he has to pay no later than occupancy. He can't occupy his development until he's paid the fee. But if he wants to pay early, he can. Oftentimes they defer it as long as they can because they don't know that their projects is going to move forward. It may go bankrupt. So they tend to defer, but they take the entire risk that we, the district, will increase the cap fee. So if it takes them 2 years to build their project, they're running the risk that the cap fee will increase, maybe just by the engineer news record construction inflation index, or it may be because the board chooses to redo the cap fee model and increase the rates that may be faster than the inflationary index. But it's a choice that the developer makes. Like I said, if they wanted to pay immediately, as soon as they submit plans for review, they can. And that happened recently with the proposed Kaiser Hospital. They paid their cap fees early. They didn't wait till occupancy. I don't know their reasons, but I'm guessing they just wanted to hedge against future inflation. And they with their funding sources, they just wanted to get that set aside and secure their capacity. Another reason a developer may pay early is that they want to secure the capacity in case there's a building moratorium, if there's a water or a sewer reason we can't provide service, because once they pay, they're guaranteed service. If they don't pay, they run the risk. So it's a business decision that each business owner, each developer makes as to when they want to pay the fee, but we won't allow it later than prior to occupancy.
So yeah, and Glenn makes a good point. And the next example I want to talk about is what if we, during that time, if we say they paid at inception, what if we raise the rates between then and year 3, right? So in this next example, let's look at what happens if they pay at inception. Nothing changes, right? They pay $9,720 for 100 EDUs. So they pay $972,000. We earn the interest of $49,207. So the proceeds are $1,021,000. But if they were to pay at year 3, and in year 2, we went through our cap fee study and we set the rates and they were effective January 1st of year 3, which is January 1st, 2020 is what we did this time. So say they came in and paid January 1st, 2020 this year, January 2nd, 2020. They would have been subject to a 30% rate increase in the sewer fund, right? So our sewer rates increased by 30%. So in this example, they would have had to pay $12,986 per EDU, which is our current rate, and they would have had to pay it for 100 EDUs. So it'd be $1,298,000. So in this example, collecting the revenue at completion actually benefited the district by $277,000.
So you're telling me that developers know this, they know that this is a possibility, and they don't include a rider in any of the agreements saying that we will pay the fee at the time of project initiation?
Our ordinance says that they have to pay the fee in place at the time they pay the fee. So we don't enter into side deals that they can put a freeze on the rate. The fee that they pay is what's in place at the time of the payment.
So that's what happens with the cap fee timing, whether you pay at inception or completion. And showing this scenario, it actually turns out to be beneficial for us to collect it at completion.
And so how frequently do we reassess these fees? I know that we just had one in 2019. When was the last time we did it before 2019?
It was April 4th, 2012 was the last cap fee study that was completed.
2012.
Yes.
But every year in between, it was increased by the ENR, the inflationary index. So it's not like we set it at 12 and it was flat for 7 years. It increased every year by the engineer news record. We didn't do an additional study, but when we adopted the fees, we're allowed to add an inflationary increase. So the board took the action back in 2012 that they set a new rate and included an escalator. And every one of those 7 years, it escalated. And then in 2019, we redid a study and increased the rates by a composite 17.9%. And that restarts it. And then they'll grow at an inflationary index from then until the board authorizes staff to do another cap fee study.
And I'll add that when the finance committee learned of this, and it's on our meeting minutes that we had that you can find online on April 15th, 2019. We were a bit surprised as well that it hadn't been done at that point, prior to 2012. And there's a lot of conversation, a little bit of frustration that's expressed during that meeting. And so whatever does come out of either tonight or future meetings on this, I do think we need to enhance our ordinance around this to put a requirement that we do not go, over 5 years, maybe even 3 years, but definitely 5 years without doing a study.
Right.
And the real reason, and the reason for that is because, I mean, not just so we can charge what is appropriate, but we try to be mindful that we don't want to have 17.9% increases all at one time on anybody. On it could be a restaurant owner, it could be a single family residence, it could be a developer, right? Our goal should not be to have these 18% increases on anybody. It should be people should pay their fair share, developers should pay their fair share, but we should be smart about it and have it increase over time so there's not this one-time big jump. And I think that's just the right way to conduct business.
Mike, but on our own defense, if you remember, 2012, we were just coming out of that recession. So there was not a big push why we need to increase the fees, because the thing had been flat for 3-4 years. And so,
No, I certainly understand that. And there's these unique situations in time, like what we're in right now with COVID. I wasn't on the board in 2012, so I don't have all the history. But I still think for just kind of a best practice that we can still evaluate and do the study every 5 years, and maybe the study reveals that they don't need to be changed. Maybe the study reveals that they need to be lowered. You never know, but whatever it might be, but whatever the results are, the results are.
I agree.
So the next question, if there are no more questions on this one, is probably will be a lengthy one as well. Why do we have a deficit in the sewer fund? So in order to answer this question, we got to look at the historical reserve balances. So these are the historical reserve balances for capacity. And you can see here that the last time we had a positive balance in the capacity reserves was 2007. After 2007 and 2008, we had $11.8 million in growth projects. And of those growth projects, $8.1 million was for the Encina Phase 5 expansion. So after we realized we had the Encina Phase 5 expansion costs, we issued debt to cover those costs. And that debt was issued in the amount of $8 million, and the proceeds were put into the CAP fund in 2009. But then in 2009, we spent another $4.5 million on the Encina Phase 5 expansion. And we completed it in 2010 and spent an additional $700,000. So that project by itself, the total cost was $13.3 million. And we had a debt issuance shortfall of $5.3 million. So that was really the direct result of the shortfall in the sewer fund. Moving on from there, I have more story to tell if there are no questions right now. I'm going to go through the sewer first, and then I'll tell the story of the water. And this is all, you can see it's 2007 and 2016 historical. I'm going to refer to these as the dark times. That's why I made the slide black. From here, I'll go into the positive or the recovery times.
So I just want to make sure I'm tracking. So for example, we borrowed $8 million and the cost was more than $8 million. It was $13.3 million.
That's correct. And then if we were to have set the cap fee based on an $8 million project, which is probably why we issued $8 million, then the cap fee would be too low. So that's going to sort of double-edged sword you, right? So you don't have enough debt proceeds to sort of cash infuse it. And the good news is you're only paying for an $8 million debt, but the project costs you $13 million. So you don't have a high enough cap fee to cover that.
And Wes, let me add to that. So these costs are EWA. These aren't district costs. These weren't our estimates. EWA told us the estimate, and we relied on those estimates to start the process for the bond issuance. And as Wes mentioned, it's a 6-month plus effort to do that. And as the project got underway, they realized that there was a lot of complexities, a lot of change orders, and the costs escalated, but we were tied into the bonds that we had sold at the time. we didn't know the project was going to cost 13.3 million. Had we known that, we would have probably issued $13.3 million in bonds for a large project like that.
So moving on from there, after the $0.7 million in 2010, we had an additional growth projects of about 3 million. Well, the total growth projects for 2010 were $3 million. That includes the 0.7. And the next time we issued debt was in 2013. We issued $7.1 million for 3 different projects. And from there forward, we had $8.6 million in growth projects. So that's how the sewer fund got to $6.2 million shortfall in 2016. That's the sewer story. On the water side, the last time we issued debt was we actually did a conversion of the 2005 COPS to a fixed rate. And we added new money to that conversion, and some of it was for the Twin Oaks Reservoir #2. And about $20 million was for that. $16 million went into the capacity fund in 2007. That's where the $13.6 million balance resulted from. But from there, from 2007 to 2016, we had $13.5 million in growth projects, and we had 0 debt issuances. Now, this is not to say that debt is the answer or debt will fix this. You really want to set your cap fees appropriately and issue debt when it's appropriate. So this could have happened for many reasons. Development could have slowed, and we didn't think we'd have the EDUs coming in to actually be able to pay for the debt service. So at this time, it may not have, and I'm assuming all of this stuff. I wasn't here for the majority of this time, but there can be a lot of reasons for this. You set the cap fee too low because your horizon was too long. There could be development slowed. There could be other reasons for this happening. But this is the story. It's not to say anything negative. It's just the story of what happened. And then during this time, the cap fees collected from 2007 to 2016 were $9.8 million, and our debt service costs were $20.1 million. So that kind of points out that even if you'd issued debt at this point, it may have been a cash infusion, but you'd increase your debt service costs. So it's not necessarily a fix for the situation.
Yeah, hey, Wes, I'm sorry. I think that's an important point that you made, that you weren't there, but you're going back in time to 2007. I don't think any of us were here when this started. This was the prior administration, general manager, Dennis Slam, finance, chief financial officer, Tom Scaglione. And I bring this up because if you go back and you listen to this all kind of came to light in 2019. And that's why we had such a jump with the capacity fees, because if you go back and listen to the finance meeting on April 15th, 2019, in our minutes that are posted online, you'll hear a tremendous amount of discussion and frustration about the prior administration and what they put us in, the situation that they put us in, and how now the board had to go ahead and fix that. Glenn Pruitt wasn't here. Wes, you weren't here. None of the board members were here. I really encourage any of the new board members or members of the public that are interested in this topic to go back and listen to that meeting, because it was really the prior administration that started this practice, and they put us in this situation.
So I have kind of a naive question. I understand that we have more projects than we have either borrowed money for or planned to get money in for. I understand that. Why are we planning so many projects? It seems, if I'm thinking about my own household budget, for example, we don't live beyond our means. We know what the budget is. And as much as I would love to have a new Tesla X model, I don't. I have a 2001 Ford Expedition, and I'm going to drive it until the wheels fall off. So I guess sort of trying to relate it to myself and for the public, and I realize that I'm oversimplifying this, and I know that this is really complicated, but why do we keep having more projects than we are budgeting money intake for? And as a board, isn't it our responsibility to say, look, this is the money we're going to get in. Maybe we have to not do all those projects.
Yeah, so I would say that these projects that we're talking about aren't nice to haves. These aren't gold-plated type of projects. These are projects that are needed to provide for future growth in the district. And that's one of the district's main responsibilities, is to ensure that you can provide water and wastewater services within your service area. That's what we do. So these projects fall under that category. So if we weren't to do that, if we wanted to stop building the projects, you'd actually be talking about putting in building moratoriums. You would say, hey, we're out of capacity. Nobody's allowed to build to construct anymore, and construction would halt in this area. Fortunately, that's never happened in this area, and we try to plan to make sure that we can bring in the revenue to pay for those projects. But I think it's proper planning to allow development to occur within your service area. That's why we were formed, to serve the public, and that's future customers as well as existing customers.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, it's staff's responsibility as well to keep the board informed and to work with the board to provide, updates on a regular basis. And at some point during this, we'll call it a slope, a downward slope, to say, look, we need to look at the cap fee rate and we need to reset it, right? We need to increase it because it appears that we set it too low before. So we need to take some corrective action. So while the board, it's a shared sort of responsibility and it's teamwork. And that's what we're doing now, and that's what we're doing moving forward. Is we're actively addressing this deficit. We've already redone the cap fee model. Our shortfall action plan will address it in the future, and we're taking care of it now.
And Director Sinella, President Sinella, a little historic San Marcos history here. We did have a moratorium on sewer in the early 80s. And we did have a mandatory amount of building that we could not go above, which during those years was hellacious. Everybody was strained. So this, coming out of it, we decided, let's plan for the future and then build for the future so that we don't ever have to go through that again. Because as an architect and a builder at the time, everybody was at each other's throat. City, water authority, Encina, us at Vallecitos. So no one wanted to see that again.
I can appreciate that, but if it's, our job isn't to make San Marcos attractive for developers. That's not what we do. And I can appreciate that historical perspective, but if it's bleeding us dry to try to keep up, I think it's really important that we take a look at that. Our job is to provide affordable, reliable water and sewer services. And we do have customers now. We're obligated to those customers. We are not obligated to future customers to make it an attractive space for us to get future customers.
That, unfortunately, this is an attractive area. They're going to come. We know it's going to come.
I know they're going to come. I know. So I don't think we have to bend over backwards to make it attractive. They're going to come. Well,
yeah, but that's I got mine. So to heck with everybody else. We need to plan for those other people that we know are coming. I personally am not going to be part of, well, I've got mine, so I'm going to limit who can else come. That's not the America that I'm from. So I want to plan for a reasonable growth to take place in the future and everybody paying their way. And we think we are trying to do.
Thank you, Director Hernandez. Wes, is there a reason why your graphs stop at 2016, or are you going to give us the more current picture next?
Yeah, so I did mention that it's the black slide because it's the dark times. So I'll move on from there to the brighter times, and you'll notice it's not a black slide when I go forward.
Yeah, because that's and I can't stress this enough, and I'm not trying to pass the buck here, but we're talking about times when nobody that's on this call right now, except for maybe in the audience from past executive staff members that worked here, nobody was here during this time. And so I want to see what the recent board and the recent actions that staff has done, because I think that's probably more relevant for one, and kind of gives us points us in the direction as to where we're going and not where we've been.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, and I think it is important to recognize that we've inherited this and we have to fix it. Mm-hmm. And I also feel like that should give us all the freedom of space to not feel like we are invested in defending this. So I'll say that.
I wouldn't know. I'm not, I mean, if you go back and listen to that finance meeting, I was not defending this at all. I was outraged.
So I would like to defend our shortfall action plan here coming up. I say that.
Nice transition.
Okay, so the next slide. What is the timeline for overcoming this deficit, and what progress can we make in the next 2 years? So in order to do that, we need to look at our 2016 and forward with our 5-year plan up to 2025. So here's a chart you've seen before. These are the reserve balances. You'll notice it starts with 2016, which is what we just saw. The combined balance was somewhere around $16 million deficit. You'll see that it leveled off from 2016 to about 2020. And then in our plan for this year, our approved budget, it dips down to around $22 million. That is as a result of $5.7 million in projects. That's the San Marcos Interceptor mainly. And that we expected that and we're planning for it. So that was part of a question that was in a previous board meeting. Someone had mentioned we spent $4 million on the San Marcos Interceptor and it was 70% capacity. How do we plan for it? And the answer is yes, it's shown here in this chart. So 2021, we're anticipating to get down to around 22 million. Currently, we're at $15.1 million as I showed before. And the good news is for capacity fees, we budgeted to collect $5.2 million for the year. And to date, we've collected $5.5 million. So we're over our cap fees and we still have a good 5 months left of the year. That doesn't mean we're going to be able to forecast that evenly for the next 5 months, but we've already collected what we anticipated. So the next steps, according to our approved budget and our 5-year plan in recovering the deficit, we plan to look at issuing debt, and in the budget it lists $10 million as a debt issuance in 2022. We've already started discussions with our financial advisors. This doesn't mean that we're planning on issuing the debt. It just means as staff, we're getting ready, right? So we're talking to them, finding out what our options are. We've calculated the amount of the existing inducement resolutions and how much those will cover for past projects. If we decide to issue taxable debt or tax exempt debt, that's not the only option available to us. The district is also able to issue taxable debt. So we have tax exempt, taxable, private placement loans. We have several different types of debt issuances that we can do, not all of which require inducement resolutions or projects to be identified. But we just through the tax exempt debt, we'd have more than enough capacity to issue this $10 million if we decided to do that. Anything we discover as staff, anything we research, of course, will be brought to the board before any decisions are made, and we'll hopefully provide you with the best possible options. But the $10 million.
Wes, maybe you can talk about the capacity fee study and what the assumptions were on interest rates and what we are seeing in interest rates today.
Absolutely. Yeah, so in the capacity fee study, we actually show $18 million in 2023-24. So we're a year or two ahead of that. The assumptions made there, though, were that we would get 6.5% interest over 25 years. So we're currently looking at with the tax exempt, it's 3.25 to 4%. Taxable is about the same rate. It's under 4% for taxable debt. And that's over a period of 25 years. So there's a significant savings in the interest. So if we were to issue a year or two early, we could actually figure out the difference there. And I'm sure it wouldn't be too detrimental. It may even be beneficial to the district to go 25 years, have a lower debt service payment, and issue a year early.
And I would add that I'm not a finance guy or an accountant, but I did some calculations. And if we issued $10 million of debt, which we show here, and we got a 3.5% rate instead of a 6.5% rate, that would save us $5 million, a little over $5 million over the 25-year repayment schedule. So we look at those things all the time. We plan for horizons like 5 years, but then we look shorter term too to say, hey, is now the time? And now may be the time. And that's probably a conversation for a future meeting through the finance committee and to the board is, do we want to be issuing debt? And the rates are attractive. So it's, I think there's a lot of positive aspects of this recovery.
Yeah, the rates are attractive. We have the debt service coverage ratio, the capacity to actually issue the debt. We have the credit rating. It's all about whether we decide it's the best time to issue debt. So in 2023, you've seen this before, but we have planned projects of $4.8 million. So it will dip a little bit after the debt proceeds. And then we have $35 million more in projects based on our 2021 budget planned. And at that time, we'll be looking at issuing about $50 million in debt if everything goes according to the current budget plan. So to answer the question, where will we be in about 2 years? Well, according to our approved budget and our capacity to our current plan, we'll be somewhere around, so it'd be 2023, somewhere around $12 million, $13 million, still at a shortfall state in 2 years. That doesn't mean that's all we can do in 2 years. With the upcoming budget process, the budget process we're in now, we will, and looking at the debt issuances, we may issue more than $10 million. We may issue 18 million, 20 million. If we do that, it'll be a sort of a temporary plug to the deficit where it fills in the cash proceeds and it goes closer to zero. But we also may look at during the budget process, we may look at it and say, those projects aren't going to cost $4.8 million in the next couple of years. They're going to cost less, or they're going to cost more. So we'll have a better idea where we'll be in 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years once we start getting into the budget process and completing that long range plan. It's also important to note that during that process, when we look at these debt issuances, we make sure, or try to make sure, they're in line with our cap fee model so that we don't end up issuing too little debt according to our cap fee model, or too much debt. We need to keep it as much in line with that as possible, and in our ability to plan, and we have to meet our rating criteria. So a lot goes into it. But then to sum up this slide, over the next 5 years, we'll have $45.6 million in growth projects according to our current budget plan. And we plan to issue $60 million in debt if everything were to go as planned here and if the board decided to do so.
So a couple of quick questions. So right now, where it says the $5.7 million in projects, how are we paying for that? Is that from debt that has been issued before?
No, that's going to be an increase, a temporary increase in the internal or paper loan from the replacement fund to the capacity fund. And the capacity fund will pay the replacement fund interest on that internal loan.
Okay.
Until it's fully paid back.
Correct.
Okay. And whenever you go to buy a house, and again, I'm trying to relate it back to something, that the average person can understand. Whenever you go to buy a house, and let's say, you have your down payment and you are, let's say you're $50,000 short, and you have to go to the bank and you ask the bank for, we need $50,000 to buy this house. The bank appraises your house and says, your house appraises and will loan you the $50,000. But let's say you wanted to pay off your car payment or something on the side, and you said, "Hey bank, I want to borrow $60,000." Sometimes the bank says, "Well, no, the house only appraised to $50,000, so they'll only give you what you can, what they know the money's going to be spent on." So if we've got $45.6 million in growth projects, why would we borrow $60 million? And can we get that money? I'm just not sure.
Yes. So, and I can't answer with certainty right now, obviously, because it's 5 years from now. However, we're showing the $10 million in debt proceeds here, right? So in our current estimate, I put it together a few days ago, we could actually get about $18 million in previous projects that we're getting reimbursed for, as well as the next 3 years of expenditure. So we'd have $8 million more in capacity there. And the major thing that's looked at by banks when they issue debt is they would say, what's your capacity to pay it back? And for us, it's what's called a pledge of revenues. So they would look at us and they'd say, okay, your revenue is at this level, right? And your debt is here. So our current debt service level, which means our ability to pay that debt, is at 4 times. It's at 400%. So our required level of debt service coverage ratio is 1.15%. So as long as we're below that, required or above that required level, then we're able to issue debt to that capacity. We have a AA+ rating, and we've got a very favorable debt service coverage ratio. So that combined with the projects that we're doing, which are considered, and the tax exempt debt, they look at it as, the government projects. So when they see these, it's pretty easy to get debt to fund these projects. So with the projects plus our credit rating and our debt service coverage ratio, I could be confident in saying we'll be able to get $50 million in debt. I'm not a financial advisor, but based on discussions I've had with them, they haven't been like, oh, I don't know, you better be careful, or you might not be able to do that. So I think we will be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do have contracts with the certified financial advisor, and Wes has met with them. So it's not just Wes's opinion or reading a magazine. He went and talked with the experts in the field, and they've assured him that they think we're really good candidates for this type of financing.
Well,
And
I read The Economist, so.
Wes,
Yes, sir.
Wes, are you gonna ultimately show us what our reserves are presently?
Yep.
I have a slide on that. I hope I included it. If I didn't, I'll unhide it and show it to you, Director Hernandez.
Okay, thank you.
I did show the capacity balance already in that scenario, but I can bring it up again. It's $15.1 million combined as of January 31st, 2021.
In sewer or total or what?
Combined.
That's total, but I'll show you the breakdown. I'll make sure I show you the slide at the end. I just don't, it's a lot of numbers and I don't have any like circles on it to point stuff out. So I'll have to guide you through it with my mouse.
Okay.
Okay, so the next slide I'm going to show, I just like this slide because it seems to be like a recovery slide. I probably should have made it a different color since I've already mentioned it twice, but it is like a recovery slide. Over the last 4 years since 2017, the good news is, I consider it good news, our capacity fees have been in excess of at least our debt service requirements, our debt service payments. So over the last 5 years, we've collected $31.6 million in capacity fees, and we've paid $27.3 million in debt service payments. It is important to note that this doesn't include the interest from the capacity fund. That interest paid over the last 5 years has been $1.2 million. So you'd actually have to increase the 27.2 to 28.5 to get to the actual debt service plus interest payments to the replacement fund. But we're still above it with the 31.6 over the last 5 years. So I just like this slide. It shows that we're actually showing recovery. And an important thing to note is this is before the 17.9% increase to the capacity fees.
Just to be clear, Wes, we have paid ourselves back $1.2 million.
We have paid the replacement fund $1.2 million in interest.
And that's our reserve. We paid ourselves back that amount.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's for the internal loan.
Yes.
So the next director question, if we actually have money in the bank.
Hey, Wes?
Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, when Director Hernandez says we paid ourselves back, it was developers paid interest back into the replacement fund of $1.2 million.
Yes.
Yeah, remember those quadrants at the very beginning. One side, the capacity fund paid back the replacement fund, the interest.
So the next question, if we actually have money in the bank that is not reflective of a negative balance in the fund, how much is there? If it's not enough to cover our planned projects, how do we pay for them? So first of all, let me say that it is enough to cover our planned projects, and I'll show you the balance that we have in the next slide. So this is from our unaudited. So I plugged this into our financial statements that we report on an annual basis that will be audited, but this is as of January 31st, 2021. Our current cash and cash equivalents in total is $80.2 million or $80.3 million. Of that, 3.1 is restricted for debt service payments. So really you have $77 million in cash that's available for use to pay for projects if we so choose. So moving on, the next question is, what do you mean by paper loan? Who is the borrower? Who is the seller? Or who is the lender? And what are the terms? So paper loan was actually we put it in quotes all the time because it was a term used by our consultants that we hired to do our CAT fee study. It was in the write-up and they actually referred to it as a paper loan because it's an internal loan. It's an internal loan from the replacement fund who'd be the lender to the capacity fund who'd be the borrower. But it's not a gift of money, and no actual transactions or journal entries or fund transfers were made from one fund to the other. They're still recorded separately, and the capacity fund pays interest to the replacement fund for that internal loan. Because it's an internal loan, there's no actual transfer of money. There's no promissory note. There are no formal documents for the loan. It's just internal reporting so we can track it. So we can track the liability of the capacity fund to the replacement fund to make sure that the replacement fund is paid back and made whole on that loan over the next 10 years.
And just remind me, the replacement, where does that money come from?
That's ratepayers.
Cut.
That's a portion of what the ratepayers pay into. They pay for operating costs, water purchases, and a portion of that goes to establishing our replacement reserves.
Okay.
And Wes, can you, okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. I wanted to talk about the terms, but you've got it.
Yeah, so it's paid back over 10 years. And I think I just said that, but forgot to bring up the next bullet. So those are the terms of the loan. We have the lender's replacement, the borrower's capacity, and it's paid back over 10 years, and it's at our current rate of interest earnings.
Yeah, that's important because if there wasn't this paper loan from the replacement to the capacity, then that money, in this case, about $16 million, would have been invested on behalf of the ratepayers, and they would have received a certain amount of interest, right? The fact that it's a paper loan to the capacity, the replacement fund is getting the exact same amount of interest they would have otherwise gotten if they hadn't made the loan. So the ratepayers are made whole. They're not out there's no lost interest earnings, and they will be repaid in time. So we don't think there's any harm to the ratepayers with this paper loan.
And what's the interest?
It's our current internal rate of return. And right now it's really low. It's like 0.6%, I believe, something like that. It's actually listed every month on the investment report, which shows our combined investments from Chandler Asset Management and LAIF and the county pool.
Thank you.
So when you're explaining this, I mean, it might explain, because we hear all the time, why are ratepayers subsidizing, developers? Is this the explanation? It's just a matter of terminology? Or is there something else there?
This is one piece of the explanation, but as General Manager Pruitt said, they're made whole. So there's no loss. It's as if they had the cash the whole time. They get everything they would have gotten otherwise. The other portion of it is and we stress this all the time, is that the deficit is not included in calculating the rates. So we do not take the negative $6 million and include it in our revenue requirement to recover through water rates. The only thing that's included in the revenue requirement are operating expenses and any necessary transfers to replace existing infrastructure, which is replacement. That's borne by the ratepayers. So they are not affected by this shortfall.
Right.
So our capacity shortfall action plan, as you know, we've been actively addressing the deficit. The board since 2019, since we started looking at this, has really been actively trying to address the deficit. And the major thing that we could do was really redo the cap fee study. So the first thing we did was we finalized the cap fee study. If your cap fees are too low, that's the major problem with the whole thing. So we looked at the cap fee study. And then the next thing we did based on that cap fee study was we increased the cap fee rate by 17.9% January 2nd, 2020, so a year ago. We've gone back and looked at it internally with staff, myself, General Manager Pruitt, Mike Arthur. We've had several meetings even with engineering, talking about how we're doing to date and looking at it, and also coming up with how we want to bring that to the board and discuss it. So after that, we incorporated those rates into the fiscal year 2021 budget. So that plan that you saw over the next 5 years with the increase or the decrease in the shortfall was based on those rates. And we need to issue debt as outlined in the budget, which is in coordination with the cap fee model. So if we're doing that and looking at it and it becomes beneficial in the right time and the right amount and the right rates of debt to issue, we will do so with the board's approval, of course. And finally, the shortfall in the capacity reserve pays interest to the replacement reserve. We mentioned it before, I'll say it again, they're made whole, they're not hurt, they're not affected by the deficit. So this plan, it takes care of the whole shortfall. But the thing I want to add to our shortfall action plan, because I know I've discussed this part of it before, and we've hit on it in this meeting, actively addressing it and continuing to actively address it. And I think we can do that by committing to annual updates to the board on performance. So if we, around the time that we do the budget process and get the budget approval, which would be around June, maybe the end of the fiscal year, I think, and we've discussed this, but I think we should bring annual updates to the board and talk about our performance, how it relates to our action plan that we just talked about, and how it relates to the cap fee model. We can bring the board things like how many EDUs have we actually sold during the year, and how does it compare to our cap fee model plan? How much capacity fee revenue have we taken in, and how does it compare? How are the projects costs compared to what we actually plan to spend this year? Other things we can look at, land use, the EDUs that we planned on selling, how did that compare to what we actually sold? And then, are there other plans for land use coming out with Sandag, and should we be looking at the possibility of doing a master plan? Master plan is no easy undertaking, and James will give you more information about that, but we can bring it to the board and let you know why it could be a good idea, why it's not, it doesn't make sense. Like if there are no updates on it for the master plan, then there's no point in undertaking $1 million effort. But all of this can be brought to the board on an annual basis to keep you informed. So staff is following it. And so we're taking action and keeping the shortfall in check. So in conclusion, so the district does have a deficit. We've talked about it numerous times, but I can't stress this enough. It's not included in customer rates. It's not part of the revenue requirement. It doesn't affect how we set customer rates. They are not subsidizing development. Growth pays for growth. And well, and that being said, are we Prop 218 compliant? And the answer is yes. And our consultants and our attorneys have agreed with us on numerous occasions. We are compliant. And the capacity fund, it is tracked and reported separately. We've shown this through these presentations. The funds are never commingled. The only revenue that goes in the capacity fund is from developers, and it is Mitigation Fee Act compliant. And our consultants and our attorneys have agreed with us on numerous occasions that we are in compliance. And finally, the capacity shortfall action plan. We have a solid plan in place to address this deficit. We're actively addressing it, and it's based on an improved cap fee calculation. We shortened the horizon. We made the cost more accurate. We put in correct debt issuances and better and timely debt issuances. It's an improved cap fee calculation, and it's based on an improved debt issuance plan. We have an improved knowledge of looking at mistakes of the past. I'll call them. I hate to call it mistakes, but looking at past knowledge, things we've learned from the past. We hopefully have a better idea of when it's appropriate to issue debt, the levels of debt to issue. Can we plan for the cost of a project better? Can we, for Encina Phase 5, was there a way that we could say it was going to cost 13 million versus 8 million and issue the appropriate amount of debt and include that in our capping model? Hopefully we can learn from all that, and that's part of what we're looking to do in the future. So that's my presentation for tonight. I'll take any questions you may have.
Hey, Wes, can you bring up that slide that Director Hernandez had asked for?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Let me, it's hidden, so I don't know if it'll pop up. So I might have to stop sharing for a minute, but I'll bring it up.
While you're looking for it, just wanted to say thank you, Wes, and for a great presentation, and also Mike Arthur for your contributions as well. Appreciate it.
Okay, let me unhide. And I should be able to do this. Okay, then I just have to share it. Add escaped. Okay. I'm getting there. Okay, this should do it. Oh, it has the notes screen, but hopefully you can kind of see that. I don't have any notes in here. So Director Hernandez, this is the January 31st summarized version of the reserve report. Can you see that okay, or do you want me to get the bigger version?
I do see that. I see the 15.1, which is the combination.
So you had the beginning balance at June 30th, 2000.
Yeah, you don't need to go through that. I got it.
Okay.
Wes, I thought he was
What I
asking
did
for the
want
one
to
that-
ask, though,
Go ahead.
what I did want to ask, you mentioned in your presentation that we've got 80 million round numbers in our cash or cash equivalent. How does that relate to this number? Or doesn't it? Or
Okay, so it's not going to directly relate to that number. Let me pull up a number that Yeah, let me do the combined and you'll be able to see it better on this one. And then do like this. And this time I can share it correctly, so.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so this is the full reserve report summary for January 31st, 2021. And you
Okay,
can see,
so is that $87,000 greenback dollars we have in the bank?
87 million.
87
Yes.
million?
yes,
Okay, so I'm a cash guy. If I've got 87 million in the bank, why am I going to go borrow 10 million and pay them 4 point some odd percent when I could go borrow it for myself and pay myself back that?
Thank you for asking. I was thinking the same thing.
and it's a good question.
What's the answer?
Well, they've been doing it, directors. That's
Well-
it's one of the financial levers that the district has as an opportunity, right? And I've been trying to simplify this too. And Director Boyd Hodgson and I kind of think the same way. We try to relate things to kind of real life stuff. And I almost view it as like if you were if you needed money, right? For whatever, you needed a loan, borrow money for something that you didn't have the cash on hand. You could go take a loan, or one option for you might be to borrow that money from your 401k. And your 401k in some cases allows you to borrow the money that you've previously contributed to it under certain circumstances. There's a special set of rules that kind of govern what you can and cannot do with that. And then when you pay it back, you're paying your 401k yourself back plus interest. And so it's very similar to that in my mind. And it's one of the financial levers that the district can pull. Another one is issuing debt. The other is to raise fees. There's a lot of different things that the district has at its disposal, and finding the right balance of those things to meet the needs, the infrastructure needs for our district is the magic recipe. And not one of them is a silver bullet, but you got to find a combination of all of those to meet your needs.
But just to be clear, right now, I'm getting in my bank 1.3% interest on the money that's in my bank. I can pitch pennies against the wall and make that. If I was going to build a house and take a loan, the best loan I could get is a 2.3% loan. So rather than borrow the money, I could take my money out of the bank and build that whatever I wanted and pay myself back better interest. We could do the same with our 87 million. Is that correct or not? If we chose.
So you're saying continue to do what we're doing now?
We're paying our ratepayers right now, what are we paying? 0.6%?
So, but what you're saying is that instead of issuing the $10 million in debt, don't issue the $10 million in debt, basically. And
Right, but what are we paying ourselves right now?
It's like 0.5 or 0.6%.
0.5. Well, why don't we charge 2.3%? Or whatever. I mean, did I hear you say the bond issue is going to be 4.6 or maybe
No,
3?
It'll be 3.5, somewhere around there.
Well, why don't we charge ourselves 3?
That may be an option. We may be able to look at establishing a way to increase the interest rate that's paid to the replacement fund from the capacity fund. We could look into that.
Okay.
So the major reason why you would issue debt in the capacity fund that I can think of right now would be, for example, the capacity fund has to be responsible to fund itself, right? So it's got to have its own proceeds, its own revenues coming in to fund itself. If for some reason the capacity fund, or if the shortfall were to become too large, or if the replacement fund were to have some sort of emergency where we had to spend too much money and the reserves were to come closer to the floor. So the replacement fund cannot go below the floor plus the
Right.
operating reserves.
Right.
Yeah, and I would add, if you look at the chart Wes showed that showed the future debt issuances, we're looking at issuing $60 million of debt. At some point in time, the amount of debt is more than the replacement fund may be able to cover and still meet our minimum requirements. So I think it's a very viable option up to now, and it's to continue to do these paper loan is a viable option. It's probably a viable option for a short term into the future, maybe that first 10 to $20 million of debt issuance. But when you start talking about $50 million of debt issuance, I think then if you start looking at the impact it might have on the available cash and the reserves in the replacement fund, it may not be viable at that point in time. And yeah, so this is what I thought you were going to bring up before, Wes.
No,
Yeah,
that's,
so
yeah, I
Yeah,
understand.
I wouldn't-
that. You can't give away all your money, but perhaps that first 10 or so is something we'll look at as part of the portfolio of items in order to solve this problem.
Yeah, I would be more comfortable using it as a tool in our toolbox as part of solving this. I think there's a public perception issue. And that's part of the reason why we're even talking about this now. We've been talking about it for a couple of years now. And the issues that are this practice, if you will, and I'm not even going to call it an issue or a negative thing. It's an option that previous leadership at the district exercised. And we're in this situation today because of those decisions back in 2007 and 8 and 9. And I'm not saying it was wrong that they did that, but it definitely has led to some confusion and a public perception issue that we've now, since 2019, when we've recognized it, have been addressing. And then based off of what Wes just presented to us, there's some future steps. So just one board member's opinion, I think it's an interesting tool at our disposal, but I'd be a little bit leery of continuing to I wouldn't overuse that practice, I guess is probably the best way to do it. Best way to say it.
yeah, and I'd say not overusing is a good idea. One thing I would like to point out though is that the current interest rates are at record lows. We know that, right? We've heard about the Fed setting rates and that they're extremely low right now. And if we're talking about a debt issuance that we can lock in at 3.5% for 25 years, in 10 years, it may be up to 6.5, or 5 years, it may be up to 6.5%. It may get higher than that.
Yeah.
So when you look at that aspect of it, it may be a good idea to consider issuing debt at this point because we do have the shortfall and because we have the options and we've got a really low interest rate on those options.
Yeah, that's my biggest concern, that at some point, maybe 5 years in the future, we may be forced into debt issuance.
Oh.
And I can tell you, there's going to be a point in time where interest rates are going to go through the roof to make up for these years of artificially low rates. So you never want to be put in a position where you don't have options. So I think issuing some debt in the near future will provide us with more options going forward and not forcing us into the only option available, which may be to borrow money at very high rates.
Particularly from someone who went through the late 80s when my mortgage on my house was 18%. I borrow all the money I can at 2.3.
Is there any other director questions? I do see that we have a hand up in the audience. I want them, if they're listening, to know that I see it, and we will get to them. But I just want to, I don't know if we've heard from all the directors. Director Boyd Hodgson.
Thank you for putting this presentation together. I really appreciate the walkthrough of the scenarios. And I think, imagining that in the abstract, being new to the board has been very difficult for me to wrap my head around. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the time you took. I appreciate your humor, and I appreciate your persistence and your capacity to explain this to me several times. So I'm grateful for that. I think we have a lot to think about, and I think that I agree with Director Sinella, or President Sinella, that there is a public perception issue here. I think that the point that Director Hernandez made is a really good one, that maybe a lower interest rate should be something that we should think about. However, as we get down the road, and I'm assuming all of this is legal, right? I think that there's also a question of that too, that's out there in the public. is it legal that we are borrowing from the fund that's where we get the ratepayer money? Is it legal? I'm going to trust that it is because we have legal counsel that can advise us on that. But I see the positive points that many of you all have made, and I appreciate the presentation. I did ask to know how we are tracking relative to other districts, and I don't see that in this presentation. And I know that I know that I made a large ask with not a lot of time. But my question is, did you have a chance to look at that at all? And if not, are you planning to? And I hope you are, because I made the ask. And I'm wondering if that is something that we can look forward to at a subsequent meeting.
Yeah, and maybe I'll answer, and then Wes, you can add to this. We certainly, we got your request. We discussed it. We did start to do some research, but you referenced 21 agencies, and we got the request Monday afternoon. So we just didn't have time to complete it. And it's very complicated. So you can't just go on somebody's website and pick one number and say, oh, their capacity fund is at a deficit or not at a deficit, because there's much more to the story. We don't know what their debt service level is. They may have done what we're talking about doing. They may have gone ahead and issued a lot of debt and have zero deficit, which looks good on paper. But when you dig deeper and you realize, oh my God, they're really saddled with debt. We're glad we don't have that kind of debt. That's harder to dig out of the report, of their online reports. Plus, when you look at these agencies, all of them have different levels of remaining development. We happen to be an agency that has a tremendous amount of remaining growth. Most agencies aren't like that. If you compare ourselves to like Livenhain, who's our nearest, most comparable district, they're virtually built out. So their situation, they're near the end of that curve that we will be at 30 or 40 years from now, where they don't have much development. They have very small numbers to close the gap. We have big numbers, big deficit, because we have a lot of remaining development. So we either have to wait a long time for developer fees to pay off the deficit, or we have to issue large amounts of debt to close the gap in a short period of time. So to try to compare our agency with these other 21 agencies it's a research project. It's huge. And if the board wants us to do that, we can do that. But I just think it would be very difficult to draw conclusions from that unless they're at a very high level. And then I think we can reach erroneous conclusions based on the limited depth we probed into each of those 21 agencies.
Sure, and I appreciate that. And you know, I as I mentioned in the follow-up, I will rely on your expertise to sort of figure out which ones are like comparisons, because I appreciate I spent an hour on the Borrego website trying to dig into the information, because I also mentioned that I would help with this effort. So I think maybe 21 is not, that was a huge ask and it's not all appropriate. But as I mentioned, maybe there are 5, maybe there are 7 that we can at least look at to try to understand how we compare. And as far as the build out, my understanding from the CAPV study is that we're about 60 to 65% build out. So we're past the the halfway point, but we do have quite a lot left. So I think that is an important point, but I want to put those numbers out there because that's what we're documented as having, I think.
Right. Yeah, Glenn, I'm always interested to benchmark our operations against our peers out there that do the same, business or industry. So I would be interested. I mean, 21's a lot, but I don't know what if 3 would be reasonable. But I understand. I mean, maybe you can't come back and show an apples to apples comparison, but you could give us information such as what's their cap fees and where do our cap fees compare to theirs? What's their debt and how does that compare to our debt? And then do they have a deficit or I'm trying to think of the right word. The right deficit is kind of a weird word because it sounds like that it's more of an IOU if I could put it that way. But do they borrow from their replacement fund temporarily in any way, shape, or form? I'd be interested to see how that benchmarks.
Well, we could certainly cull from the list that Director Boyd Hodgson provided. And Wes and I actually had this discussion. There's probably 4 or 5 agencies that would make sense. So you get the Olivenhains, the Helix, Otay, maybe Padre Dam, those types of agencies that some are bigger than us, some are a little smaller, but they're kind of in the same level of sophistication, I would say. And we can, as long as we're, Director Sinella, you provided kind of a short list of what you'd be looking for. That type of thing is doable. I don't know that it would be easy to draw conclusions from that. So we can give you some raw data. And I think everybody would be left to their own device to say whether they're doing it right or are they in a better situation than we are. But we can certainly provide the raw data.
Yeah, I think that data would be helpful. And I agree with you. I don't think we're going to be able to ascertain that we're doing something either better than the other districts or we're doing something not as good as the other districts based off that information, because there's only so many levers you can pull. Like I was mentioning earlier, you either do this IOU process from the two different funds, you issue the debt, or you raise the fees are really the only things I can really kind of think of off the top of my head. So whatever combination they're doing, maybe, if you think about it, maybe we're doing a little bit here and a little bit less there and a little bit more here. And they're doing, and their three options are stacked in a little bit different way. Doesn't mean they're doing it better. Doesn't mean that we're doing it better. It's just how they're doing it, right? And it might inform us on a path forward on, we can evaluate how we're doing it, compare the pros and cons to how other districts are doing it, and then decide into the future, do we want to adjust how we're pulling these different levers?
Okay, we can certainly do that.
So I don't want you to think that we ignored the request either. I did actually work on some of it myself, and I talked to Mike Rassman, our new accounting supervisor, to start looking into this. And we actually took a look at Olivenhain, Helix, Otay, Rainbow, Padre. We started looking at, we had their debt levels. Mike Arthur has actually prepared a comparison for the cap fees on them, even though that's not easy to do because most of those agencies have different methods of calculating the cap fee rate. They might have a buying portion. They might do the hybrid method. It's very difficult to come up with an apples to apples comparison when you're looking at cap fee rates. The debt's the easiest part of that. When you want to say how much debt do they have, we can put that together relatively quickly. But the capacity reserves themselves, the reserve policies of different agencies are so different and so complex that, and they may not necessarily be following, it might not be being legal. They might be saying, you know what, we're allowed to use general use funds for capacity. And they're not, and you're not supposed to do that according to the Mitigation Fee Act. So I know some agencies we looked into, I read through the reserve policies, and it actually said they could use general use funds for capacity. And at least as far as I know, you're not allowed to do that. And other agencies just have so many different funds in their reserve policy. It becomes like one was 24 pages long. So, we're working on this and we can try to put something together so that it makes sense, that it might be useful information. And that's what we've been working on. But yeah, with 21 agencies, really the first step would be kind of to go through and say, not applicable because they don't have growth or they don't have cap fees. And then from there, I think these, 5 or 6 that I mentioned are probably growth agencies. And we did look at them. And I can say we are not the only agency with a shortfall. So that's, if someone were to say that, it's just not true. And we probably wouldn't be the only, there were probably more of us if we didn't have the different ways of doing the reserves and sort of transferring funds.
Yeah, and I guess I would suggest that maybe we can work this through the Finance Committee. We can bring our preliminary results through the Finance Committee and then look for Finance Committee's recommendation on how to bring this forward to the board.
Okay, I have one hand up out in the audience. I hope I'm saying this correctly, but can you allow Tyga, I'm hoping that's right, to speak, Glenn?
Yes. You should be allowed to speak right now.
Tyga, can you hear us? I can't hear him.
Yeah, I can't hear anything.
I see him. I see his picture now.
They muted?
No, doesn't look like it.
No, I unmuted the microphone.
Now it shows muted.
Go ahead. I heard a click.
Yep. No, it looked like he lit up, like it was gonna allow him to speak. Tyga, do you still wish to speak?
Yeah.
Oh, we can hear you, but if you can speak up a little bit, that'd be helpful. I don't know if it's his microphone or I heard him say, "Oh yeah," but it was very low. Is there a chat function, Glenn, that maybe he could type in a question or?
I don't know. I don't know how to do that.
There is not a chat function. We've disabled that so that it doesn't cause a problem.
Jonathan, do you have any IT recommendations as to how we could either turn his volume up or help us out so we can hear him?
I'm not sure. I see the microphone going back and forth between mute and unmute. I know
hello?
Glenn.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, hey, sorry about that. I was having some microphone problems.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you for letting me comment. I just had a few questions and comments. My name's Taiga Takahashi, and I'm an attorney for one of the customers in the district. And I sent a letter a little while ago. I'm not sure if you received it, but my questions aren't really related to that. I wanted to thank the staff for the presentation. It was really helpful. Helped me understand a lot of things that I didn't understand before. My first question, I just have three of them. My first one is, and I know you didn't talk about the replacement fund, but, given that, it's sort of related because of these, paper loans between the capacity and the replacement fund, what's the right level for the replacement fund? And what factors go into determining what that level is? Because, one concern that I had, and Mr. Owen alluded to it, is that, given the potential for emergencies and the need for the need to use the funds in the replacement fund, I guess, it seems to me that the replacement fund needs to stay at some certain level. And so I was just wondering, like, what is that level, and what are the factors considered in determining that? And then my second question, about like the appropriateness, I guess, of borrowing from the replacement fund for the capacity fund, is that, just from a public policy perspective, I'm not sure that the customers, are aware of it, and if they were, would they want, that the rates that they're paying, that revenue, to be used to cover a shortfall in the capacity fund that's supposed to be funded by developers and who should be funding that fund. And so, it's been a question for me as whether that's really an appropriate use. And, part of that is that, the replacement fund, as you noted, it's to support existing infrastructure and the replacement of existing infrastructure. And so, it needs to be protected for that use. And that goes back to my first question is, what considerations are made when deciding to make, these paper loans in between the replacement fund and the capacity fund.
Mr. Takahashi, this is General Manager Prum. I only captured two questions. I thought you said there were three. Maybe I missed one. One was the.
Yeah. Oh, the last one, it's related to, if there is like this, I guess, correct level or optimal level for the replacement fund, if the revenues exceed that level, through interest, made from investments of the funds in the reserve, is that money going to get refunded to the ratepayers, and not just like to the fund, but I mean, potentially in the form of like lower rates for the ratepayers in the future.
Okay, well, thank you for your questions.
Yep, thank you.
Appreciate it. And Wes, Wes or Glenn, if you want to go ahead and try to answer those, I'd appreciate it.
I'll let Wes take the first shot and I'll add as necessary.
Okay, so we have the perfect slide up to address these questions, I believe. This is actually the replacement reserve slide, which shows our historical as well as projected replacement reserves and how we determine what levels to set them at. And you'll note that the bottom is the floor. The floor is set, and these levels are set, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, they're set based on our reserve policy. It's a policy approved by the board. It's established by staff according to industry best practices. What we look at is we look at the need to replace existing infrastructure. So the floor, the minimum level of replacement reserves that we are allowed to carry is, according to the reserve policy, 6 months of operating expenses, and that's the operating reserves, and 3 years of replacement of existing infrastructure. So this green line here is that number. That's the minimum we want to have in our replacement reserves. The maximum that we can have in our replacement reserves is the ceiling. The ceiling for water is 10 years of replacement of existing infrastructure plus the operating reserves, or for sewer, it's 8 years of replacement of existing infrastructure plus the operating reserves. So every year when we go through the budget process, we look at the level of replacement reserves, and actually every month when we report on the reserve report, we look at whether the reserves are within the floor and the ceiling. I don't want to answer two questions at the same time, but looking at this by itself and our 5-year plan, we want to stay between the floor and the ceiling and have a comfortable level so that we don't fall below the floor. And typically we look at, say, having a 300 days in cash so that we have sufficient levels for rating agencies and enough to maintain our AA+ credit rating. And you can see here that in our 5-year plan, we're currently at about 102 in 2021. Our ceiling is 108. We actually plan to come down to 74 by 2025. And because it's within policy limits, that's determined to be an appropriate level. The second part he asked about was I'll go to the third question first, since it's directly in line with that, related to that. If we exceed the ceiling, it becomes rate stabilization. Sorry, I got someone yelling at me in the office to see if I'm like they're going to lock the building. So if we exceed the ceiling, then it becomes rate stabilization. Now that money is actually included as rate stabilization for future rate determinations. So if we look at the revenue requirement for the following year, we have excess reserves, it reduces the revenue requirement that would be, and in effect would reduce the rates to ratepayers. Hopefully that answers that question. The third question was about second question, but I'll answer a third, is whether it's appropriate to have the loan from the replacement reserve to the capacity reserve. We've looked at this on several occasions. We've looked at it in setting the rates for ratepayers. We've looked at it in the capacity fee study. It's been looked at again and again by our attorneys and our consultants. And because that loan is not affecting ratepayers and they're being made whole, it's been determined, at least based on working with those consultants and attorneys, that it is appropriate for us to have that because it's not detrimental to ratepayers and it's an internal loan of funds that are not necessarily restricted for a specific purpose.
And I would add maybe one bit of clarification on the third item, add to what Wes said. So the rate stabilization it wouldn't be a direct refund or rebate to the customers. It would help mitigate rate increases going forward is what it would be. So there wouldn't be rebates submitted to customers.
Right. Well, thank you again for the questions, and staff, thank you for answering them. I don't see any other hands raised at this time, but I do understand and have seen a couple of questions or emails that were submitted to staff prior to the meeting. And Glenn, did you want to take one of those and read it out loud, or
yeah,
if the individuals happen to be online and want to ask their own questions, they're more than welcome to as well. Or if they have other questions that have come up during the course of the conversation, or hopefully staffs through their presentation have already kind of answered those questions, and maybe they don't have the same question anymore.
Yeah. So I have two. One from Mr. Jack Paxton, and Mr. Paxton is not in attendance unless he's the phone number that I can't determine. I don't think he is, but he specifically asked me to read it into the record. So I'll go ahead and read that. Okay. So this is from Mr. Jack Paxton, and here's what he said. Why do ratepayers have to subsidize developers? 3 question marks. Why do you refuse to provide your customers GPD, which is gallons per day, of desalinized water VWD buys from the Poseidon plant and the quality measurements on this water? I await an answer as one of your customers. And he just gives his name and his address. So that's his entirety of his comment.
Okay. I think we addressed the developer subsidy piece of it, that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys want to further clarify that. I'm a little confused by the desalinated water question. Can you maybe
I can
clarify that for me?
Yeah, I'll try. I think it's a bit certainly out of context with regard to item 2.2, and maybe he intended these to be 2 separate public comments, but I have spoken with Mr. Paxton in the past. It's been several years. He raised similar issues. We had discussions and provided him with information or directed him where he could get the information. And it seems like he's asking the issues again. And I'd be happy to reach out to Mr. Paxton to discuss this issue with him further.
Okay.
So the next one is from Gail Martin, and Gail is in attendance, but Gail did ask for me to read it. So I'm looking at her name online, and if she wants to read it herself, I'll look for her hand to be raised. But I don't see it. So I'm going to go ahead and read what Gail presented.
Okay.
So it was dated February 28th, and it says, Dear VWD Board of Directors, I please request that my questions and concerns for the March 3rd, 2021 VWD board meeting be read for the record. Where does this 10-year projection to pay off the deficit come from? Next item, the 5-year projection in the budget includes $60 million in debt proceeds for only $45 million in debt eligible capital expenditures in the capacity fund. Doesn't appear to be a question, it's a statement. The next, considering that you cannot borrow in excess of debt eligible capital expenditures, the deficit will grow to $21 million in 5 years per your projection. Per your 2019 capital facility fee study, you would need to build 8,400 homes, in parentheses, equals equivalent dwelling units called EDUs, close parentheses, before you completely pay back what you have borrowed from the ratepayers. This works out to 840 homes per year if we are to be paid back in 10 years. During the last 6 years, which was a peak period in home construction, EDU additions for Vallecitos were less than 400 per year on average. Why do you keep claiming that the deficit, parentheses, owed to ratepayers, close parentheses, will be paid back in 10 years, whereas your numbers, when corrected to this actual number of homes being built, show the deficit will continue to increase? End of that comment. Next comment, you only have 2 pots of money, one from ratepayers and one from developers. There has been a deficit in developer money for many years. There is no developer money. Are you paying bondholders and the contractors for the San Marcos Interceptor with IOUs or with ratepayer money? Next comment, if you really intend on issuing debt, why haven't resolutions of intent to incur indebtedness, open parentheses, or reimbursement resolutions, close parentheses, been adopted with the last 3 budgets? Next, has there been a Finance Committee meeting since the April 15th, 2019 Finance Committee meeting to reverse the consensus, in quotes, to continue to borrow from ratepayers, closed quotes, instead of issuing bonds? If yes, which meeting? Did an item to authorize borrowing from ratepayers ever go to the full board for approval? If yes, which meeting? Your memo suggests that it is normal to have a deficit in developer money. Why is Vallecitos the only agency in San Diego County with a deficit in developer money? Why hasn't Vallecitos planned ahead like other agencies to issue debt and set adequate and realistic developer fees like every other agency in San Diego County, open parentheses, and maybe all of California, close parentheses, to ensure that development is not subsidized with ratepayer money? I appreciate the board of directors' consideration of my concerns, and I look forward to the directors taking concrete steps to issue debt and to stop using ratepayer money to pay for urban development. Thank you. Best regards, Gail Martin. That's the end of Gail's comment.
Okay, thank you for reading those questions, Glenn.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Ms. Martin, for asking them. I think some of those were addressed during the presentation, and so maybe we can just quickly reiterate those points. But there were a couple there that I think that didn't get brought up during the presentation. So Between Wes and Glenn, I'll let you guys take a stab at it, please.
Yeah, so maybe the first one, the 10-year projection. And Wes, why don't you address where does the 10-year projection to pay off the deficit come from?
That's from the CAP fee model based on there's a number in the in the CAP fee calculation. It's about 1,091 per EDU to be collected based on the projected EDUs over the next 10 years.
So her next comment had to do with the 5-year budget includes 60 million in debt proceeds and only 45 million in debt eligible capital expenditures. And Wes touched on this before. And I think there's some just a difference of opinion of what a debt eligible capital expenditure is. And Wes touched on the difference between tax exempt, taxable, and commercial paper, loans. There's different kinds. Wes, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and Glenn, I have the questions in front of me with some of my sort of responses, my initial responses. I can try to hit on them. So yeah, there is apparently some misunderstanding as far as the not only the amount of debt eligible expenses that we have, but I think we've talked about it through the presentations. We do have some existing debt resolutions or inducement resolutions that we're looking into recovering historical costs, which would add to the amount, plus the future debt eligible projects. Not only that, but we have the ability to issue debt, like taxable debt, that does not have to have debt eligible projects. So we can issue $60 million in debt for $45 million in projects. It's possible, and it's been confirmed on several occasions. The next one is, it says, considering that you cannot borrow in excess of debt eligible capital expenditures, the deficit will grow to 21 million. It's not true. So I don't think we need to discuss that, hopefully. The next one goes into the number of EDUs that we'll collect over the next 10 years and actual versus projected. That's something that we're going to have to revisit as we go with the updates on the CAP fee model, right? So when we bring it to the board and we say we expected to have 500 EDUs collected this year, we only collected 300. Is it an emergency situation? Should we reset the CAP fee, or should we look at it again next year? With our annual updates, we will actually look at that and we will solve that problem or issue if it is an issue, right? Saying that our 20-year projection or 10-year projection on EDUs is inaccurate at this point is not a fair thing to say.
And I would add to that, and Wes touched on this in his initial presentation, just because you undershoot a certain number of EDUs in any given year doesn't mean those EDUs are gone, that they'll never develop. It just may mean that the project got delayed and it doesn't happen in the time frame you thought. So if we thought we'd get 500, we only issued 300, those other 200 units are probably going to develop down the road sometime. So we will collect those CAP fees. We may actually collect more CAP fees because of either inflationary changes or resetting of the CAP fee. But as Wes said, we can check in every year and make adjustments that seem appropriate.
Hey, I got a question by Director Hernandez.
Yes, and just for the record, these CAP fees are developed by virtue of the city and the county giving us numbers. We're not just making those up. Those numbers are given to us. So if we don't reach the numbers, the county or the city anticipated more growth than actually took place.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are not a land use planning agency. So we rely on the land use planning agencies within our jurisdiction. And that includes the city of San Marcos, the county, city of Carlsbad, city of Vista, city of Escondido. And they look heavily at Sandag for their growth projections when they develop their plans and build out. So we rely on them and we incorporate their projections into our master planning and CAP fee study projections. And as Wes said before, every time you put together a plan, it's based on a lot of assumptions, and assumptions are always wrong. Sometimes they're high, sometimes they're low, but they're never right on. No one has that perfect crystal ball. So that's why you redo the plan every 5 years or so, and you can do check-ins maybe annually or every other year to see if you're deviating from your plan.
So the next question was about, I'm sorry if anybody else has any questions, I don't want to jump on them. Okay, so the next question was about the pots of money and basically how do we pay for it? So it's a very similar question to when we talked about any payment for projects would be a temporary increase to the internal loan, and the replacement reserve would be paid back with interest. And then it says, if you really intend on issuing debt, why haven't resolutions of intent to incur indebtedness or reimbursement resolutions been adopted in the last 3 budgets? Because there's some misunderstanding there about when you need to actually issue reimbursement resolutions. The requirement says that within 60 days of beginning construction on the project, you need to have a reimbursement resolution. So you don't want to, there's no point in issuing, well, you could issue debt 3 years beforehand, but really you're not required to issue until you've started the project and within 60 days. So we would only issue reimbursement resolutions for projects that we were within 60 days of construction that we intended to issue debt. So we don't, they're not required. And we already have existing reimbursement resolutions for 6 projects that are outstanding, that are in construction. We are looking at whether we need to issue future reimbursement resolutions, and we will do so when the timing is appropriate.
Yeah, and issuing a resolution of intent doesn't commit you to issuing bonds. That just says we may be issuing bonds related to this project. You still have options open.
And then, has there been a finance committee meeting since April 15th, 2019 to reverse the consensus to continue to borrow from ratepayers instead of issuing bonds? If yes, which meeting? I do not believe that you can have a consensus at a finance committee meeting, so I don't think this is really an applicable question. And I guess it sounds like I'm correct because nobody corrected me. And then, did an item to authorize borrowing from ratepayers ever go to the full board for approval? If yes, which meeting? And we've talked about this as well. It's an internal loan for tracking purposes, and it's basically an accounting for that internal loan. So there's really no official documents required, and no money has been transactionally transferred between one fund to the other. So no is the answer. It says your memo suggests that it is normal to have a deficit in the developer money. Why is Vallecitos the only agency in San Diego County with a deficit in developer money? We've already talked about this as well. I believe we are not. There are other agencies that do have deficits in developer money. Why hasn't Vallecitos planned ahead like other agencies to issue debt, to set adequate and realistic developer fees like every other agency in San Diego County? We have set realistic developer fees, and that's the most important thing. Issuing debt is not necessarily the answer, as we've discussed. You're increasing your debt service costs. Really, you want to do that when the timing is appropriate, when the rates are appropriate. We have done what the most important thing is, which is setting adequate rates. We increased the capacity fee rate in January of 2020 by 18%. And I think that's all of her questions.
Hey, Wes, thank you for that. I see a hand up by Director Pennick.
Yeah, just a question or a comment. And I preface this by, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, but it sounds like Ms. Martin has done quite a bit of research on other agencies. And earlier in the meeting, we've asked staff to gather a bunch of information from other agencies. I mean, if she truly has it, why don't we collaborate with her and say, instead of us doing exactly what she's just done, going out and getting numbers from other agencies that's public, see what she has, because isn't that what we asked you guys to do earlier in the meeting with the 5 or 6 agencies?
It's a piece of what we were asked to do. Yeah. So
I mean,
we'd be happy
if she's
to,
already done the work, let's use some of her work and thank her for it. And I understand, and then get, I don't know, it just might save them time.
I see the point, Director Pennick, but I think some of the things that the big takeaway I had was, Wes, you'd said that there are other agencies that have a developer deficit. I'm assuming that you're not naming them because you don't have them off the top of your head. And so when you bring back the benchmark information, can you bring back that information, the specific agencies?
So I do have them off the top of my head. I have not verified the information. It's given to me from staff. But yes, we'll be happy to. And not that I haven't verified it. He actually sent me their budget and their balances. It's maybe just I don't trust him because he's new, No, just kidding. But yes, we'll be happy to show that to you once we've come up with the, maybe we bring it to the finance committee, and if it's decided we want to bring it to the board or whatever, we're happy to show you that information. But for now, just trust. For now, I can say that in 2019, there were 2 agencies that I only researched 5. 2 of the 5 actually had deficits in the developer fund. And now 2020, only one of those 2 still has a deficit.
Okay, just be kind of curious to, I mean, not that we, I mean, if we went and researched every claim that's made against us, we'd be full-time researchers. But I do think, given that this is a hot topic, that's being pushed by a former employee, that we need to at least look into this particular claim a little bit more and come back with the more specific information. Okay, so first off, thanks for answering those questions. Thank you again, Ms. Martin. I think that concludes the presentation, and I'll open it up to just general board member discussion. And I think the goal here is to come out of this meeting with not only a better understanding of this topic, but also some direction for staff as to where we want to go from here. And I see a hand, Director Hernandez.
I just want to thank staff. This has been an excellent presentation. It clarified a number of little items that I had. I had the general idea, but an excellent presentation, Wes, and addition of Mike and Glenn. Thank you so very much.
Any other questions or comments?
President Snell, I have a comment.
Okay, Director Helatar.
Yeah, I'd like to thank staff as well. Wes, you've done an excellent job for I think for the fourth or fifth time I've heard this, and I'm totally supportive of the action plan you've laid out. So thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, well, thank you again, staff, for such a comprehensive report. As was mentioned before, it is a complicated discussion, and I could see where there could be some confusion and probably some ulterior motives behind some of the questions that we get. But nevertheless, you guys did a fine job addressing it and making it as clear as it possibly could be. And I too fully support the action plan that was presented, but I'm looking forward to maybe adjusting that action plan based off the data that you're going to be collecting and presenting, in the next meeting or the meeting after that as well, or at a finance meeting, where whatever venue that you're going to be presenting that could take us in a different direction. So we'll see. But thank you. And with that, we'll move on to. Boy, it feels like we've been on this on 2.2 for a long time. Okay, so with end of action items, and let me get onto my notes here, and we'll go to reports. Is there any general manager report? And it's okay if there's not.
I do have a few. I'll try to make them quick. So
Okay.
The first one,
that was a hint.
I know I don't take hints that well. One's real quick. The winter edition of Between the Pipes is being mailed out today, and they'll get it over the weekend. Maybe some good news, and I shared this with the board via email, but we will be getting a rebate from the County Water Authority regarding the settlement of the lawsuit between Metropolitan Water District and the County Water Authority. So the Water Authority received $44.4 million from Metropolitan, and they elected to rebate it to all their member agencies. Vallecitos' share will be $1.6 million of that, which is good. And Director Helatar may say more about that in his report. And on the one more positive news, we just received our notification from Aqua JPIA that we will be getting an insurance refund check in the amount of $149,764.15. And you remember, normally a representative from Aqua JPIA would come and present the big giant check, but that's not going to happen because of COVID this year. And just a real quick, last one real quickly on San Marcos Boulevard. They're finishing up construction on along eastbound San Marcos Boulevard, so there's still one lane closed. We think that should be reopened by the beginning of April. So there's some more information on that, but in the interest of time, I'll yield the floor to Mr. Gilpin.
Thank you, Glenn. We'll move on to legal counsel report. Oh, We can't hear you.
Yeah, you're muted, Jim, or we can't hear you for some reason.
Still can't hear you, Jim.
I don't think you can hear us.
Yeah, we can't hear you. Yeah.
Hand puppets. There,
Oh,
Try now.
Okay,
all right.
we don't have them.
okay.
Okay, then we'll move on. Director Althorp, item 3.3, San Diego County Water Authority report.
Yeah, I'll try to, in the interest of time, I'll try to be brief too. I attend on February 23rd, I attended a Colorado River Work Group meeting of the Water Authority. And the purpose of this group is really to receive updates on Colorado River issues on a quarterly basis throughout the year. And for this particular meeting, they focused on an update on the regional conveyance system Phase B study, and which focuses on economics, partnerships, and stakeholder outreach. And so for the regular board meeting was on February 25th. Pretty routine items with the exception of the one that the general manager just described. In closed session, the board approved to take that $44.4 million and issue rebates to prorated rebates to each of the member agencies. And so, and that also includes, it's what's also been awarded as attorney's fees, which isn't included in that 44.4 million number. That's probably going to be a while before that comes to pass. That I believe is still subject to appeal by Met. But that without getting into details on closed session discussions, those attorneys' fees are in the millions of dollars and could potentially be another large rebate check to the agencies. So with that, that's my report.
Thank you, Director Althorp. I'll kick us off for Encina Wastewater Authority. We didn't have a committee meeting since the last committee meeting, but we did have a full board meeting. And if you remember in my committee report that I gave at the last Vallecitos board meeting, I talked about that the committee was learning about and then going to put forth a recommendation for the full board about a potential land use option with a cell phone tower in their south parcel. And there's a lot of discussion around that, the pros, the cons, how much revenue could be generated from that. And long story short, the committee recommended it to at least go to the Encina board doesn't have the authority in of itself to do this. It ultimately will come down from the Carlsbad City Council. Two Carlsbad City Council members serve on the full board. And so when the full board took the issue last week and discussed it, they ended up, the Encina full board ended up voting unanimously to basically move this along as a potential acceptable use if the Carlsbad City Council approves it. So that was the main thing that took up, I would say, probably 85 to 90% of our time. Very positive discussion. Definitely we're weighing some of the controversial aspects of cell towers, but now it's in the hands of Carlsbad City Council, and we wait for them.
Just to add to that, Mike, this is a potential of between $3,000 and $5,000 a month revenue. So this is as much money or more than we're going to make on our cell solar installation at pump station number 1. So I'm hoping they're looking for more sites.
Well, according to the Encina board was very mindful. We had on that board, there's representatives from Encinitas City Council, Carlsbad, so those coastal cities. And because this is a coastal project, I think most of us kind of put a little bit more weight in their opinion, right? Because they represent the people in those coastal communities. And we asked the question like, hey, where did you guys stand on this? Because we don't want to put you in a bad position, right? And they actually came back and said that, and not serving on a city council, I don't know all the particulars, but apparently their hands are tied to a certain extent when it comes to these cell phone towers. and they're obligated to put so many of them up. And they said that it's tough for them to find appropriate, good places to put it. And our parcel and at Encina, I say ours, but Encina's parcel is actually one of the better places to put it. And it actually helps the city of Carlsbad meet their requirement while also being mindful of the residents. And so they were very grateful that we were considering this as an option. The side benefit is that the Encina gets to generate additional revenue outside of processing our waste. So it could be a win-win. And Jim, I know that you were there, so I didn't mean to speak about the whole thing, but did you want to add anything further?
Nope, you did a fine job.
Awesome job. Okay, we'll move on to the standing committees. Did any of the standing committees meet? Director Boyd Hodgson.
You. The P3 Public Awareness Personnel and Policy Committee met on Monday, and it was we're tackling a lot of issues right now, but I just want to bring to everyone's attention that we made some progress on incorporating inclusive language in the Vallecitos application for employment. So I want to thank Director Pennick for his work on that. And as General Manager Poom has said, over the next decade or so, we're going to have 1,000 jobs in water to fill over the county in the next 10 years or so. So, having more inclusive language, supporting the recognition of someone applying being non-binary and seeing someone as their authentic self and having them feel good about being able to be their authentic self when they're serving at Vallecitos. I think that's really important, and I hope the word gets out that we have that designation on our application now.
Super, awesome. Any other committees meet? The finance committee did meet, and we got a kind of a budget kickoff meeting, if you will, and it included one of Wes's party pages, his intro page. So thank you, Wes. Always fun. And this will be the first of what will probably end up being 6 to 8 budget-related meetings as we kind of go step by step through this. And of course, along the way, Wes, along the way, there'll be workshops and full board briefings. And so I know that at least 3 of us have been through this a few times, so we're kind of familiar with it. But for the 2 new directors, there definitely will be, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of little pieces about it. And I know that Director Boyd Hodgson and I will be digging into the budget, looking for every opportunity to be as efficient as we possibly can. But remember that we can't make any decisions without the rest of you. And so we'll be coming to you regularly with updates and recommendations. So looking forward to that. And any director's reports on meetings, conferences, or seminars? I have not attended any. Did anybody else? Okay, Director Hernandez.
Yes, I attended the ACWA meeting that is traditionally held in Washington, and very positive on water. Half a dozen congressmen and senators spoke to, all positive on water, positive on infrastructure. And what was interesting, this was a Zoom meeting versus going up to the Hill and seeing them face to face. So there was some benefit. It was short and sweet, and it was filmed because I had to leave for an hour, but I was able to go back and pick up right where I left off, and so that was a benefit. And let's see, and that was the report. I don't want to get into details. Generally supportive of water.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Director Hernandez. Director Althorp, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, on February 18th, I attended California Special District Association San Diego chapter program. The subject was impacts of COVID-19 on operations. And they had a good panel. They had 3 speakers from 3 different types of special districts. One was North County Fire District. Another was Grossmont Healthcare, and the third was Sweetwater Authority. So it was pretty interesting. They each described their kind of their particular impacts during the pandemic, and also kind of what they see as long-term impacts on each type of special district going forward after the pandemic. So very, very interesting.
Yeah, I meant to attend that and had it on my calendar and everything, and then it just I think I just had a busy, crazy day at work, and it just slipped my mind. So I'm glad that you were able to make it. Any other directors attend anything? Okay, great. Other business, it says 4.1 meetings. I don't think there's anything to talk about that. Director's comments on future agenda items. I have one, but I'll give everybody else an opportunity first. Director Hernandez.
2 items. One, I would like to see the pledge on our future agendas. I think it's important. I appreciate today putting that on there and letting me do the pledge. And the second is happy to hear about our insurance and bringing that back on a future agenda, discuss what do we do with that insurance money, get some background for the new board members. In the past, we've benefited some of the employees with some of that money. So I'd like to bring that back as a board item for a discussion.
Where's that refund from?
JPIA, the insurance money we paid in that they said, hey, we've done a good job. They gave us back some of our own money.
Basically, if we didn't have as many workers' comp claims as we anticipated, or we kind of pre-funded, if you will, then we get a refund on it.
Okay, so it's just all work comp. It's not a liability. It's just all work comp.
It's actually 3 pools of money. So there are 3 accounts. There's workers' comp, there's property, and there's just general liability. And they want you to have a certain amount of money in your reserve account, and then they compare your claims history over the minimum, they refund the money. So
Great.
You're an insurance guy. You'll love that conversation.
Yeah, it sounds exciting.
Director Boyd Hodgson.
So just a reminder, I had asked at the last meeting for an item to be agendized about our susceptibility to cyber attacks. So I'd like to see that on an upcoming meeting.
Right. Okay.
And then I wanted to, kind of along the same lines, kind of, I guess, on the same lines as what Hernandez was asking for with regard to the money that's being returned on the insurance piece of it. I'd like to have a discussion as to how we're going to use the money that's coming back from the County Water Authority lawsuit. And I'd like to try to, if it's at all possible, I know rate stabilization is kind of the easy way to do it, but I want to kind of maybe try to have a discussion to kind of think of things outside the box of how we could actually directly impact our customers. And again, I know there's a lot of legal parameters, but is there a way that we could use that money, because it's kind of a windfall? Can we use it to benefit our customers who are struggling the most right now during COVID? And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what all the legal things are, but I think it warrants at least a discussion. And if we can't do anything, that's fine, but I'd certainly like to talk about it. Another interesting thing about that, it sounds really good that that the Water Authority won this $44 million lawsuit, but keep in mind they buy water from the people that they sued, and the people that they have to pay that claim now are just going to increase the price of their water that they're going to sell back to the County Water Authority to make up for the loss of the lawsuit. So it's probably not a dollar for dollar gain, but it's definitely a positive thing. So but anyways, if we could talk about that, that'd be great. Director Alatar.
Yeah, I think I've asked the general manager for a future agendized item is kind of a status update on the Met Water Authority rate litigation. There's been a lot happen over the last decade or so, and I think it'd be worthwhile to get an update on that. And we've talked about maybe having Water Authority personnel come in and do that.
Yeah, that would be nice. We've had that before, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
Director Pinnick, I see a hand.
Nope.
You got a little high five signal going.
Oh, I do, huh? I was just high-fiving everybody.
It's all good. Awesome. Well, great. I think that's, the last thing is adjournment. So wonderful meeting, guys. For those that are in the public still, thank you.
Yeah.
Are you saying goodbye, or are you saying I need to talk?
No,
I think you need to adjourn to close. We need to go back to
Oh
closed
yeah,
session.
we got to go
Yeah,
back to the
sorry
closed
about that.
session.
and I hope we get 5 minutes in between.
Okay. Thanks for reminding me. Again, we're gonna go ahead and adjourn our regular meeting, and then we're gonna take a break for 5 minutes. So we'll come back at 7:47, like the airplane. And thank you again to those in the public who joined us, and we'll see you guys at 7:47.